Story 1. My wife, 8 months pregnant with our first child, texted me during my night shift. My ex contacted me last night and proposed. I accepted. I'm moving out tomorrow. When I called her immediately, she declined and sent another message. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I didn't beg, I didn't cry. I just replied, I hope you find what you're looking for, and changed the locks that morning. That was 4 months ago. Last night, she showed up at my apartment door, exhausted and tear-stained, with all her bags and our newborn baby girl, begging. Look, I'm going to tell you something that'll make you question everything you think you know about love, betrayal, and the twisted games people play with each other's hearts. 4 months ago, my pregnant wife texted me during my night shift to tell me she was leaving me for her ex. Last night, she showed up at my door with our baby, begging to come back. And here's the part that'll really mess with your head, I almost said yes. I know what you're thinking. You're probably already forming opinions about what kind of man I am, what kind of woman she is. Trust me, I've had 4 months to think about it myself, lying awake at 3 in the morning, replaying every moment of our relationship like some twisted highlight reel. But before you judge anyone in this story, let me tell you exactly how it all went down. Because nothing, and I mean nothing, was what it seemed. It started on a Tuesday night in March. I was pulling a double at the warehouse, trying to scrape together extra money for the baby stuff we'd need. Sarah was 8 months pregnant then, round and glowing and complaining about her back every 5 minutes. We'd been married 3 years, together for 5, and I thought I knew her better than anyone in the world. My phone buzzed at 2:47 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was watching the clock, counting down the hours until I could go home and rub her feet while she told me about her day. The text was short, clinical, like she was canceling a dentist appointment. Marcus contacted me last night. He proposed. I said yes. I'm moving out tomorrow. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at that message for maybe 10 full minutes, watching the words blur and refocus, waiting for my brain to process what I was reading. Marcus. Her college boyfriend, the one she'd dated for 2 years before we met. The guy she claimed to hate, who'd cheated on her with her roommate and left her crying in dorm hallways. That Marcus. I called her immediately. It went straight to voicemail. Called again. Same thing. By the 4th try, I realized she'd turned off her phone. That's when the real panic set in, not just the betrayal, but the practical horror of it. She was 8 months pregnant with our daughter. Our daughter. The baby we'd planned and dreamed about and argued over names for. The little girl whose nursery I'd spent 3 weekends painting the perfect shade of lavender. I left work. Didn't even tell my supervisor. Just grabbed my keys and drove home through empty streets, my hands shaking so hard I could barely steer. The whole time, I kept telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe someone had stolen her phone. Maybe it was some sick joke. Maybe I was having the worst nightmare of my life and I'd wake up any second. But when I pulled into our driveway, half her stuff was already loaded into Marcus's pickup truck. He was there. Standing on my front porch like he owned the place, wearing designer jeans and a smug expression that made me want to introduce his face to my fist. He was taller than I remembered, broader, with the kind of easy confidence that comes from never having to work a day in your life for anything you wanted. Hey, man, he said when I got out of my car, like we were old friends bumping into each other at the grocery store. Sarah's inside. She's pretty emotional right now, so maybe give her some space? Give her some space. In my own house. While he loaded up her belongings. I walked past him without a word. Found Sarah in our bedroom, methodically folding clothes into suitcases. She looked up when I entered, and for just a second, I saw something flicker across her face. Guilt, maybe. Or regret. But then her expression hardened, and she went back to packing. You couldn't wait until I got home? I asked. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. Inside, I felt like I was falling apart at the molecular level. I thought it would be easier this way, she said without looking up. Less drama. Less drama. She was leaving me for another man while pregnant with our child, and she was worried about drama. Sarah, what is this? What's really going on here? I sat on the edge of our bed, the bed where we'd made love, where we'd felt the baby kick for the first time, where she used to curl up against me and talk about our future. Is this about the money? Because I know things have been tight, but it's not about money. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were completely flat. Empty. Like looking at a stranger. Marcus and I. We never really got over each other. We just needed time apart to realize what we had. What about what we have? What about our daughter? She'll be better off with a father who can provide for her properly. The words hit me like a physical blow. I'd been working 2 jobs, pulling doubles, sacrificing sleep and sanity to make sure we had everything we needed. And it still wasn't enough. I wasn't enough. Sarah, please. Let's talk about this. Whatever's wrong, We can fix it. Don't do this to us. Don't do this to her. I gestured toward her belly, where our daughter was growing, completely unaware that her world was being torn apart before she was even born. But Sarah just zipped up another suitcase and called for Marcus to come help her carry it to the truck. I watched them load up 3 years of our life together. Photo albums, wedding gifts, the rocking chair we'd bought for the nursery. Marcus made several trips, always avoiding eye contact with me, whistling under his breath like this was all some casual moving job. The last thing Sarah took was the ultrasound picture from our refrigerator, the one where you could just make out our daughter's tiny profile, her perfect little nose and the curve of her forehead. I'll be in touch about logistics, she said, standing in our doorway with her purse over her shoulder and her hand on her belly. What about her name? I asked desperately. We were going to name her Emma. Remember? After your grandmother? Sarah's composure cracked for just a moment. Her eyes filled with tears, and I thought maybe she'd realize what she was throwing away. But then Marcus appeared behind her, put his hand on her shoulder, and the moment passed. Take care of yourself, she said, and then they were gone. I stood in that empty house for hours, walking from room to room, trying to process what had just happened. The nursery was the worst. All Emma's things were still there, the crib, the changing table, boxes of tiny clothes we'd spent hours picking out together. But the rocking chair was gone, leaving this sad empty space in the corner where Sarah had planned to feed our daughter. That's when I did something I'm not proud of. I went to the kitchen, found the bottle of whiskey we'd been saving for Emma's birth, and I drank. Not all of it. I'm not completely self-destructive, but enough to numb the sharp edges of what felt like my heart being slowly carved out with a dull knife. Around sunrise, I called a locksmith. If you're expecting me to say I spent the next few months drinking myself into oblivion or stalking them on social media, you're wrong. I'm not that guy. Instead, I threw myself into work with the kind of manic focus that probably worried my coworkers. I picked up every extra shift available, worked weekends, took on projects no one else wanted. The money I'd been saving for baby expenses went toward getting the house painted, fixing the leaky faucet in the bathroom, upgrading things I'd been putting off for years. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about Sarah every day. Every single day. Wondering if she was happy, if Marcus was treating her right, if she ever regretted her choice. I imagined scenarios where she'd call me, crying, admitting she'd made a terrible mistake. I rehearsed what I'd say, how magnanimous I'd be. How I'd take her back without question because that's what love is, right? Forgiveness? The fantasies were pathetic, and I knew it. But they got me through those first few weeks when breathing felt like a conscious effort I had to remind myself to make. I heard through mutual friends that Emma was born in April. 7 pounds, 3 ounces, healthy and beautiful. Sarah posted pictures on social media, pictures I definitely shouldn't have looked at but did anyway, torturing myself with images of the daughter I wasn't allowed to see. Marcus was in some of the photos, holding Emma like she was his own, wearing the kind of dopey smile that should have been mine. That's when I made my second mistake. I tried to establish legal visitation rights. The lawyer I consulted was a sharp woman in her 50s who'd seen every variation of family drama you could imagine. She listened to my story with professional sympathy, took notes, asked the right questions. Then she delivered the news that made me want to put my fist through her office wall. The problem is that Marcus is listed as the father on the birth certificate, she explained, sliding the document across her desk. Unless you can prove that Sarah committed fraud, or unless she voluntarily agrees to a paternity test, your legal options are limited. I stared at the birth certificate. Emma Rose Patterson Wells. Even her last name was hyphenated with his. Like I'd never existed at all. But I am her father, I said, probably sounding more desperate than I intended. I have photos, text messages, medical records from the pregnancy appointments. All of which could be explained away if Sarah claims the child isn't yours, the lawyer interrupted gently. I'm not saying it's right. I'm just telling you how the law works. The biological father isn't necessarily the legal father. I walked out of that office feeling like I'd been punched in the gut by the entire justice system. 3 months of child support payments I'd been voluntarily sending to Sarah's account, because I'm not a deadbeat, no matter what anyone thinks, and I had no legal right to even know if my daughter was okay. That night, I did something I'd been avoiding since Sarah left. I drove past Marcus's house. It was in one of those upscale neighborhoods where the lawns are professionally maintained and every house looks like it belongs in a home design magazine. Marcus had inherited it from his parents, along with the trust fund that let him play at being an entrepreneur without the inconvenience of actually needing his businesses to turn a profit. Sarah's car was in the driveway. Through the front window, I could see warm light spilling from what looked like a living room. It was a beautiful house, the kind of place where a child could grow up safe and privileged and wanting for nothing. Maybe Sarah was right. Maybe Emma would be better off there. I was about to leave when I saw movement near the side of the house. Sarah appeared in what must have been a bedroom window, pacing back and forth with something in her arms. Emma, probably. The baby was crying, I couldn't hear it, but I could see the rhythm of Sarah's movement, that universal parent bounce that's supposed to soothe fussy infants. She looked exhausted. Even from a distance, even through glass and shadows, I could see the strain in her posture, the way she held her shoulders like someone carrying too much weight. For just a moment, I felt a surge of sympathy for her. Having a newborn is hard enough when you have support. I couldn't imagine doing it while navigating a new relationship, a new house, a completely different life. Then Marcus appeared in the window behind her. He said something, I couldn't tell what, and Sarah's whole body seemed to tense. He reached for the baby, and Sarah pulled away, shaking her head. Marcus said something else, sharper this time, and Sarah reluctantly handed Emma over. That's when I saw something that made my blood freeze. Marcus took the baby, but instead of the gentle cradling you'd expect, he held her stiffly, awkwardly, like she was something unpleasant he had to deal with. And Emma started crying harder. Even through the closed window and the distance between us, I could tell she was screaming. Marcus's face changed. The patient, loving expression he'd probably been wearing for Sarah's benefit vanished, replaced by something cold and irritated. He said something to Sarah, sharp and angry, then shoved the baby back into her arms and disappeared from view. Sarah stood there alone, bouncing Emma and looking like she was about to cry herself. I sat in my car for another 20 minutes, watching Sarah pace that bedroom with our daughter, and I realized something that should have been obvious from the beginning. This wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd imagined. This was a woman who'd made a desperate choice and was discovering, too late, that desperation makes for terrible decision-making. But I didn't do anything with that knowledge. Not yet. Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the legal maneuvering and the months of sleepless nights, I still loved her. And love, apparently, makes you do stupid things like respecting someone's choices even when those choices are destroying them. So I drove home, tried not to think about what I'd seen, and went back to my routine of work, sleep, and trying to figure out how to rebuild a life I'd never planned to live alone. August came with a heat wave that turned the city into a swamp. I was working the night shift again, same job, same warehouse, same supervisor who pretended not to notice that I'd been showing up early and leaving late for months. The overtime pay was good, and staying busy kept my mind off things I couldn't control. It was almost midnight when my phone rang. Unknown number, but with a local area code. I almost ignored it, probably a telemarketer or wrong number. But something made me answer. Hello? Silence. Then, just when I was about to hang up, it's me, Sarah. Her voice was barely above a whisper, thick with tears and exhaustion. My first instinct was to hang up. 4 months of silence, and now she was calling me at midnight? But there was something in her tone, a desperation that cut through all my anger and hurt. Sarah? What's wrong? She started to say something, then stopped. I could hear her breathing, shaky and uneven. I made a mistake. A really, really big mistake. Where are you? Home. Marcus's house. He went out. With friends. He won't be back until tomorrow. I waited. She'd called me, so she could damn well find the words to say whatever she needed to say. Emma won't stop crying, she continued, her voice breaking. She cries all the time now. Day and night. The doctor says there's nothing wrong with her, but she won't stop. And Marcus, he can't handle it. He gets so angry when she cries. He's never hurt her, but what? He threw a bottle across the room yesterday. Nearly hit the wall next to her crib. And he screamed at me, told me to make her stop or he was going to lose his mind. I don't know what to do anymore. I don't know who else to call. Every protective instinct I had was suddenly screaming at me to get in my car and drive over there immediately. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think this through. Sarah, if you don't feel safe. I don't, she interrupted. I haven't felt safe in weeks. But I can't leave. I gave up everything. My job, my apartment, I burned every bridge I had. Where would I even go? The answer was obvious, but I wasn't going to say it. She'd made her choice. If she wanted to come back, she'd have to ask. I know I don't have any right to call you, she went on. I know what I did was unforgivable. But Emma is your daughter, and we need. What do you need, Sarah? Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was so small I could barely hear her. Help. I need help. I don't have anyone else. That was the moment I should have hung up. Should have told her that she'd made her bed and now she could lie in it. Should have reminded her about the birth certificate, about Marcus being listed as Emma's father, about how she'd systematically erased me from my own daughter's life. Instead, I said, what kind of help? I don't know. Can I see you? Can we talk? Just for a few minutes? I looked around the empty warehouse, at the clock showing 12:17 a.m., at my supervisor's office where he was probably asleep with his feet up on his desk. I'm at work until 6. I could come there. After Marcus gets home and goes to sleep. He usually crashes hard after he's been drinking. The smart thing would have been to say no. The smart thing would have been to suggest she call a domestic violence hotline or go to her parents or figure out her own mess without dragging me into it. There's a diner on 5th Street called Mel's, I heard myself saying. 24 hours. I could meet you there around 6:30. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. She hung up before I could change my mind. I spent the rest of my shift alternating between anticipation and dread. Part of me was excited to see her again, to finally get answers to all the questions that had been eating at me for months. But another part, the smarter part, knew that nothing good could come from this. Sarah had made her choice, and I'd spent 4 months learning to live with the consequences. Whatever was happening between her and Marcus, it wasn't my problem to solve. But Emma was my daughter. That changed everything. Mel's Diner was the kind of place that specialized in greasy food, strong coffee, and minding your own business. Perfect for a conversation I had no idea how to have. I got there early, ordered coffee, and sat in a booth near the back where we could talk without being overheard. Sarah arrived at exactly 6:30, and my first thought was that she looked terrible. She'd lost weight, too much weight for someone who'd given birth just 4 months ago. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and there were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. But she was still beautiful. Still the woman I'd fallen in love with, even if everything else had changed. She slid into the booth across from me, keeping her eyes down like she was afraid to look at me directly. Thank you for coming, she said. Where's Emma? With Marcus. He'll watch her for a few hours if I ask nice enough. There was something bitter in her tone that I hadn't heard before. The waitress came over, and Sarah ordered coffee with shaking hands. We sat in awkward silence until the waitress was gone, neither of us sure how to start this conversation. Finally, Sarah looked up at me. Her eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. I messed up, she said simply. I messed up everything, and I don't know how to fix it. Start from the beginning, I said. Why did you leave? She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to absorb its warmth. Marcus contacted me about a month before Emma was born. Just a text at first, asking how I was doing. I didn't respond, but he kept texting. Little things, memories from college, asking about the pregnancy, telling me he'd been thinking about me. And you didn't tell me. No. She looked ashamed. I should have, but I didn't want to start a fight over nothing. I thought he'd get bored and stop. But he didn't. He started calling. Late at night, when you were at work. He'd tell me about his life, his business, how well he was doing. And he'd ask about us, about you and me and the baby. He was so interested. So concerned. I could see where this was going, and it made me sick. He made me feel special, she continued. Like I was important. You were working all the time, and I was stuck at home, pregnant and scared and feeling like I was invisible. Marcus made me feel seen. So you decided to leave your husband for a guy who used to cheat on you. Sarah flinched. It wasn't that simple. He told me he'd changed. That losing me was the worst mistake of his life, and he'd spent years trying to become the kind of man who deserved me. He said he wanted to take care of me and the baby, give us everything we needed. And you believed him. I wanted to believe him. Do you know what it's like, being 8 months pregnant and watching your husband work himself to death trying to scrape together money for baby formula? Do you know how that feels? Her voice was getting louder, drawing glances from the other customers. I gestured for her to keep it down. I was doing that for you, I said quietly. For us. For Emma. I know that now. But at the time, all I could see was that Marcus was offering me a life where I wouldn't have to worry about money, where I could stay home with a baby, where everything would be easy and beautiful and perfect. How's that working out for you? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. About as well as you'd expect. Tell me. Sarah took a sip of her coffee, gathering her thoughts. The first few weeks were good. Better than good. Marcus was attentive and loving and everything he'd promised to be. He bought Emma beautiful clothes, expensive toys, everything a baby could need. He talked about adopting her, making us a real family. But Emma cried. All babies cry, but Emma. It was like she knew something was wrong. She'd scream for hours, and nothing would calm her down. Marcus started getting frustrated. He'd make comments about how his friends' kids weren't this fussy, how maybe something was wrong with her. Did you take her to a doctor? Of course I did. Multiple doctors. They all said the same thing, she's healthy, some babies are just more sensitive than others. But Marcus didn't want to hear that. He wanted a quick fix, a magic solution that would make her stop crying so his life could go back to normal. Sarah's hands were trembling around her coffee cup. It got worse after the first month. Marcus started staying out later, spending more time at work or with friends. He said he needed space to think, to adjust to having a baby around. When he was home, he'd get this look on his face whenever Emma started crying, like she was doing it on purpose to annoy him. Did he ever hurt her? Not directly. But he'd slam doors, throw things, yell. And he started drinking more. A lot more. He'd come home drunk and angry, and I'd have to keep Emma quiet so she wouldn't set him off. I felt my jaw clenching. Sarah, I know what you're thinking. That I should have left right then. But where was I supposed to go? I'd quit my job, given up my apartment. All my friends thought I was crazy for leaving you. My parents. They were so disappointed in me they wouldn't even return my calls. You could have called me. Could I? After what I did? After I humiliated you and took your daughter away? She was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with the back of her hand. I burned that bridge, remember? I made my choice. We sat in silence for a few minutes while Sarah composed herself. I wanted to feel vindicated, to enjoy watching her realize what she'd thrown away. But mostly I just felt sad. Sad for her, sad for Emma, sad for the mess we'd all created. Last week, something happened, Sarah continued. Emma was having one of her crying fits, nothing unusual, just normal baby stuff. But Marcus had been drinking, and he just snapped. He grabbed her from me and started shaking her, telling her to shut up. My blood went cold. He shook the baby? For maybe 3 seconds before I got her back. But the look in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about Emma as a person. She was just this thing that was making noise, disrupting his life. And I realized that if I stayed, if I kept trying to make this work, something terrible was going to happen. So why haven't you left? Because I have nowhere to go. She exploded, then immediately lowered her voice. I have no money, no job, no support system. Marcus controls everything, the house, the car, even the credit cards. And legally, he's Emma's father. If I try to leave, he could probably get custody out of spite. That's why you called me. I called you because Emma is your daughter, and she deserves to know her real father. And because. She trailed off, looking down at her hands. Because what? Because I made the biggest mistake of my life, and I don't know how to fix it. I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or deception. But all I saw was exhaustion and genuine remorse. This wasn't the confident, glowing woman who'd left me 4 months ago. This was someone who'd been ground down by the weight of her own bad decisions. What do you want from me, Sarah? I want to come home, she said so quietly I almost didn't hear her. I want to bring Emma home and try to fix what I broke. I know I don't deserve it. I know what I did was unforgivable. But Emma needs her real father, and I need you. There it was. The moment I'd fantasized about for months. Sarah, admitting she'd made a mistake, begging to come back. In my imagination, this was the part where I'd graciously forgive her, where we'd embrace and start rebuilding our life together. In reality, I just felt tired. Sarah, I changed the locks. I know. I figured you would. I've been seeing someone. That was a lie. I'd been on exactly 2 dates in 4 months, both disasters that made me realize I wasn't ready for anything resembling a relationship. But I needed to know how she'd react. Her face crumpled. Oh. Okay. I understand. No, you don't understand. I haven't been seeing anyone. I've been working 16-hour days and coming home to an empty house and trying to figure out how to live without the woman I thought I was going to spend the rest of my life with. Hope flickered in her eyes. But that doesn't mean I'm ready to just pretend the last 4 months didn't happen, I continued. You didn't just leave me, Sarah. You nuked our entire life from orbit. You took our daughter and gave her another man's name. You made me a stranger to my own child. I know I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for it if you'll let me. How do I know you won't just change your mind again? How do I know that the next time things get difficult, you won't decide the grass is greener somewhere else? She was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee cup. You don't, she finally said. You don't know that, and I can't prove it to you with words. All I can tell you is that I love you. I've always loved you. I was just scared and stupid and I let someone else convince me that what we had wasn't enough. And now? Now I know that what we had was everything. And I threw it away for nothing. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the woman I'd married. Underneath the exhaustion and the stress and the mistakes, she was still Sarah. Still the person who used to laugh at my terrible jokes and steal the covers in the middle of the night and cry during commercials with babies in them. But she was also the person who'd left me when I needed her most. Who'd given my daughter another man's name. who'd spent 4 months building a life that didn't include me. I need time to think, I said. Her face fell, but she nodded. How much time? I don't know. A few days, maybe a week. This isn't the kind of decision I can make over coffee at 6 in the morning. What about Emma? She's still with Marcus, and I don't know how long I can keep her safe. That changed everything. Whatever issues Sarah and I had, Emma's safety came first. Bring her to my place tonight, I said. Both of you. We'll figure out the rest later. Really? Really? But Sarah, this isn't me saying we're getting back together. This is just me making sure my daughter is safe while we figure out what happens next. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Thank you. Thank you so much. When can you get away? Marcus is supposed to be home by noon, but he'll probably sleep until evening. I could pack some things and be at your place by 8 tonight? Do it. And Sarah? Don't tell him where you're going. Not yet. I won't. We sat there for another few minutes, neither of us sure how to end this conversation. Finally, Sarah stood up and pulled out her wallet. I've got it, I said, waving her away. Thank you. For everything. She turned to leave, then stopped and looked back at me. I know you don't believe me right now, but I never stopped loving you. Not for one single day. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with my coffee and a decision that could change the rest of my life. I spent the day cleaning the house and trying to prepare myself for whatever was coming. The nursery was exactly as Sarah had left it, minus the rocking chair. I'd been using it as storage for the past few months, but now I cleared out the boxes and made sure everything was ready for Emma. At exactly 8 o'clock, I heard a car pull into my driveway. Then footsteps on the front porch, hesitant and slow. A soft knock that sounded almost apologetic. I opened the door, and there she was. Sarah, looking exhausted and scared, holding a car seat with a tiny bundle inside. Emma. My daughter, who I was seeing for the first time since the day she was born. Hi, Sarah said softly. Hi. We stood there for a moment, neither of us moving. Then Emma made a small noise, not crying, just a soft baby sound, and everything else fell away. Can I? I gestured toward the car seat. Of course. Sarah set the car seat down in my living room and carefully lifted Emma out. She was bigger than I'd expected, with a full head of dark hair and Sarah's nose but my eyes. She was awake, looking around with that unfocused curiosity that newborns have. Emma, I said softly. Hi, baby girl. Sarah held her out to me, and I took my daughter in my arms for the first time. She was warm and solid and perfect, and when I looked down at her tiny face, I felt something click into place inside my chest. This was my child. This was the person I'd been working for, planning for, dreaming about for 9 months. Emma studied my face with serious eyes, then yawned and settled against my chest like she'd been waiting for this moment her entire life. She knows you, Sarah whispered. Maybe she did. Or maybe she was just tired and comfortable and didn't care who was holding her as long as they were gentle. But in that moment, I felt like everything I'd been through was worth it just to hold my daughter. How do we fix this? I asked, not looking up from Emma's face. I don't know, Sarah admitted. But we'll figure it out. Together. I looked at her then, this woman who'd broken my heart and was now standing in my living room with suitcases and hope in her eyes. I thought about the past 4 months, about the pain and the anger and the nights I'd spent wondering what I'd done wrong. I thought about Marcus and the life Sarah had tried to build without me. I thought about Emma, innocent in all of this, who deserved parents who could put her needs ahead of their own damage. Together, I repeated. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Sarah smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her all day, and for just a moment, it felt like maybe we could find our way back to each other. Emma chose that moment to start crying, a thin wail that filled the room and demanded immediate attention. Sarah immediately tensed, reaching for the baby. It's okay, I said, bouncing Emma gently. She's just hungry, right? Usually. But sometimes she cries for hours and nothing helps. I looked down at Emma, who was working herself up to a proper screaming fit, and made a decision. Then we'll figure it out. All of it. Whatever it takes. Because that's what you do for family, even when family is complicated and broken and held together with hope and stubbornness. You show up, you do the work, and you try to build something better from the pieces of what you had before. It wouldn't be easy. Trust, once broken, doesn't heal overnight. But as I stood in my living room, holding my daughter while her mother watched us with tears in her eyes, I realized that some things are worth fighting for. Some things are worth the risk of getting hurt all over again. 6 months later, Emma took her first steps in the living room where Sarah first came back to me. She toddled from the couch to my arms, laughing like it was the greatest adventure of her life. Sarah cried, I cheered, and for a perfect moment, we were just a family celebrating a milestone. Marcus never contacted us again after Sarah moved out. The lawyers handled everything quietly: paternity tests, corrected birth certificates, custody agreements that didn't need to be enforced because he wanted nothing to do with a child that wasn't his biological daughter anyway. Some battles, it turns out, win themselves when you're patient enough. Sarah and I went to counseling. A lot of counseling. We talked about trust and forgiveness and how to rebuild something that had been completely destroyed. It was hard work, harder than I'd expected, but we were both committed to making it work, not just for Emma, but for ourselves. We renewed our vows on Emma's first birthday. Small ceremony, just family and a few close friends. Sarah wore the same dress she'd worn to our original wedding, and when she promised to love me through good times and bad, in sickness and in health, for richer or poorer, we both knew exactly what those words meant. Some stories don't have happy endings. Some betrayals can't be forgiven, some trust can't be rebuilt, some love isn't strong enough to survive the weight of what people do to each other. But sometimes, just sometimes, you get lucky enough to find out that the person you fell in love with is still there, buried under the mistakes and the fear and the terrible decisions that seemed like good ideas at the time. Sometimes you discover that love isn't just a feeling, it's a choice you make every day, even when, especially when, it's hard. Emma is 2 now. She has my stubborn streak and Sarah's laugh, and when she wakes up from nightmares, she calls for both of us. Mama. Daddy. In that urgent toddler voice that means the world is ending and only we can fix it. And we do fix it, together, the way we've learned to fix everything else. The house is full again. Toys scattered across the living room floor, Sarah's coffee cup on the kitchen counter next to mine, Emma's artwork taped to the refrigerator. It's chaotic and noisy and perfect in a way I'd forgotten was possible. But here's the thing nobody tells you about forgiveness: it's not a one-time event. It's not something you do once and then move on. Every day, I choose to forgive Sarah for leaving. Every day, she works to earn that forgiveness. Some days are easier than others. Some days, I still wake up and remember that sick feeling of reading her text message at 2:47 a.m., and I have to consciously decide not to let that memory poison the present. And some days, like today, Emma toddles over to me while I'm reading the newspaper and climbs onto my lap, and Sarah brings me coffee without being asked, and I realize that this ordinary, beautiful, complicated life, is everything I ever wanted. The funny thing about second chances is that they're not really about going back to how things were. You can't do that. Too much has changed, too much has been broken and rebuilt. What you can do is create something new from the pieces of what you had before. Something stronger, maybe, because it's been tested. Sarah still has nightmares sometimes about Marcus, about that house, about the version of herself that thought leaving was the answer. I still have moments where I wonder if she'll decide I'm not enough again, if some other smooth-talking guy will show up and convince her that the grass is greener somewhere else. But then Emma laughs at something ridiculous, or Sarah reaches for my hand while we're watching TV, or we work together to solve some mundane parenting crisis, and I remember that this is real. This is worth it. This is home. The other night, after we'd put Emma to bed and were cleaning up the disaster zone that used to be our living room, Sarah stopped suddenly and looked at me. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Taking us back?" I thought about it, really thought about it, because she deserved an honest answer. "I regret the time we lost," I said finally. "I regret that Emma's first few months were so complicated. I regret that we had to learn the hard way how to fight for each other instead of running away. But I don't regret this. Us. Right now. The family we built from the wreckage of the family we used to be." She smiled then, that same smile that made me fall in love with her 7 years ago, and kissed me like she meant it. "Good," she said. "Because I'm not going anywhere. Ever again." And you know what? I believe her. Not because I'm naive or because love conquers all or because I've forgotten what she's capable of when she's scared. I believe her because she shows up, every day, in 100 small ways that prove her commitment to this life we're building together. She gets up with Emma when she's sick. She remembers to buy my favorite coffee. She goes to therapy even when she doesn't want to, because she knows that's part of keeping her promise. She looks at me sometimes like she still can't believe I took her back, like she's grateful every day for a second chance she knows she didn't deserve. That's how I know it's real. That's how I know we're going to make it. Emma will grow up knowing that her parents aren't perfect, that they made mistakes and hurt each other and had to work hard to find their way back together. But she'll also know that love, real love, doesn't give up. That's sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is fight for them, even when they've given up on themselves, especially then. So here's my advice: if you're ever in a situation like mine, trust your gut, but don't let pride make your decisions for you. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, and taking someone back doesn't make you weak. Sometimes it makes you strong enough to build something better than what you had before. And if someone shows up at your door at midnight with your child in their arms, exhausted and desperate and asking for help? Well, that's when you find out what kind of person you really are. I'm the kind of person who changes the locks but keeps the key. I'm the kind of person who builds a second chance from the ashes of the first. I'm the kind of person who believes that love, messy, complicated, imperfect love, is worth the risk of getting hurt again. Because sometimes, just sometimes, it works out exactly the way it's supposed to. But let me tell you about the moment I knew, really knew, that we were going to be okay. It was 3 weeks after Sarah and Emma moved back in. We were still walking on eggshells around each other, still figuring out how to be a family again. Emma had been crying for 2 hours straight, one of those inconsolable fits that Sarah had warned me about. We'd tried everything, feeding, changing, rocking, walking, singing off-key lullabies that probably made things worse. Sarah was at her breaking point. I could see it in the way her hands shook when she reached for Emma, the way her breath came in short, panic bursts. This was exactly the scenario that had triggered Marcus's rage, and I could tell she was bracing herself for me to snap the same way. "I don't know what to do," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I'm a terrible mother. I can't even comfort my own baby." That's when I saw it, the real reason Sarah had been so vulnerable to Marcus's manipulation in the first place. She'd been drowning in new mother anxiety, convinced she was failing at the one thing that was supposed to come naturally. And instead of helping her through it, I'd been working double shifts, leaving her alone with fears I didn't even know she had. "You're not a terrible mother," I said, taking Emma from her arms. "You're a tired mother with a fussy baby. There's a difference." Emma kept screaming, her little face red and scrunched with whatever baby frustration she couldn't communicate. But instead of getting frustrated myself, I found myself studying her, really looking at my daughter for the first time since she'd come home. "You know what I think?" I said to Sarah, bouncing Emma gently. "I think she's not crying because something's wrong. I think she's crying because she's got something to say, and she's mad that we don't speak baby yet." Sarah wiped her eyes. "What do you mean?" "Look at her. Really look. She's not crying like she's in pain or scared. She's crying like she's indignant. Like she's trying to tell us something important and we're too dense to understand." And that's when it hit me. Emma wasn't just crying, she was talking. In the only language she had available. And instead of getting frustrated with her for not being quiet, maybe we needed to learn how to listen. I started talking back to her, mimicking her rhythm. When she'd wail, I'd respond with exaggerated "Oh really? And is that so?" When she'd pause to catch her breath, I'd wait respectfully for her to continue. Sarah watched us like I'd lost my mind, but after a few minutes, something amazing happened. Emma stopped crying and stared at me with those serious baby eyes, like she was thinking about what I'd said. Then she made a small sound, not a cry, just a little vocalization, and waited. "Ah, I see," I told her solemnly. "That's very interesting. Please, go on." She made another sound, different from the first. We had a whole conversation like that, Emma making her baby noises and me responding like she was sharing the most fascinating story I'd ever heard. Sarah started laughing, quietly at first, then harder, until she was practically giggling. "You're both completely ridiculous," she said, but there was love in her voice. Relief. Hope. "Maybe," I said, settling into the rocking chair with Emma, who was now perfectly content. "But it's working." That night, after Emma finally fell asleep, Sarah and I stayed up talking until almost dawn. Really talking, for the first time since she'd come back. We talked about her fears during the pregnancy, about how isolated she'd felt, about how Marcus had seemed like a solution to problems she didn't know how to voice. We talked about my own failures, how I'd been so focused on providing financially that I'd forgotten to provide emotionally. "I should have seen how scared you were," I admitted. "I should have told you instead of listening to someone else," she replied. We made promises that night. Not the grand, romantic kind you see in movies, but small, practical ones. Sarah promised to tell me when she was feeling overwhelmed instead of suffering in silence. I promised to ask how she was doing instead of assuming everything was fine. We both promised to remember that we were on the same team, fighting the same battles. It sounds simple, but it changed everything. Now, when Emma has one of her marathon crying sessions, we tag team it. When Sarah starts getting that panic look, I take over and send her for a hot shower or a walk around the block. When I'm frustrated with work or money stress, I talk to Sarah instead of just working longer hours. We're not the same people we were before this all happened. We're better. Stronger. More honest about what we need from each other. The crisis forced us to build a marriage based on communication instead of assumptions, on partnership instead of parallel lives. Emma's crying, it turns out, was never the problem. It was just her way of forcing us all to figure out how to really listen to each other. And that, more than any dramatic gesture or romantic speech, is how I knew we were going to make it. Because when your 2-year-old has a complete meltdown in the grocery store, and instead of panicking or getting embarrassed, you and your wife look at each other and start laughing because you both know exactly what she's trying to tell you, that's when you realize you've become a real family. The messy, imperfect, absolutely beautiful kind. Story 2. During family court, my 16-year-old son stood up and told the judge, "I want to live with mom full-time. Dad never supports me or cares about my activities." When the judge asked if I wanted to respond, I just said, "I accept my son's decision," and nodded quietly. That was last Friday. Yesterday, his private school called my ex-wife about urgent payment issues and his baseball coach texted about canceled private lessons. This morning, my ex-wife started calling frantically. You want to know what real heartbreak feels like? It's sitting in a courtroom while your 16-year-old son, the kid you've spent $43,000 on this year alone, looks a judge dead in the eye and says you never support him. That was last Friday. Today's Wednesday, and my phone hasn't stopped buzzing since yesterday morning. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up and tell you how I learned that sometimes the most generous thing a father can do is absolutely nothing at all. The courtroom smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. You know that particular cocktail of industrial cleaner and human misery that seems to permeate every government building? My ex-wife Sarah sat 3 feet away, her lawyer whispering strategies that probably cost more per minute than most people make in an hour. She'd been pushing for full custody for months, claiming I was emotionally unavailable and financially controlling. When Judge Morrison asked Tyler to speak, my stomach dropped like I'd swallowed a bowling ball. My son stood up, all 6 feet of him now, "When did that happen?" and delivered his rehearsed little speech about wanting stability and feeling unsupported. The words hit like physical blows. "Dad never comes to my games," he said, voice steady and confident. "He doesn't care about my activities or my friends. Mom actually listens to me." The judge turned to me with that patient expression they probably teach in Judicial Sympathy 101. "Mr. Henderson, would you like to respond to these allegations?" Here's where any normal father would have lost his mind. Would have stood up and rattled off the endless list of sacrifices, the tournament fees, the private coaching sessions, the premium health insurance, the college savings account that was supposed to be a surprise. Would have mentioned the missed business trips, the rearranged meetings, the small fortune in baseball equipment gathering dust in our garage. Instead, I just nodded. "I accept my son's decision, Your Honor." Sarah's lawyer actually blinked. Twice. I think they expected a fight. The gavel came down like a gunshot. Full custody to mom, effective immediately. Visitation rights for dad, that's me now, apparently, every other weekend and alternating holidays. Very civilized. Very modern. Tyler hugged his mother like they'd just won the lottery. Which, in a way, they had. Walking out of that courthouse, I felt hollow but also strangely relieved. You know when you've been holding your breath for so long you don't realize it until you finally exhale? That's what this was. The weight of constantly proving myself as a father, gone. The pressure to be the fun parent while also being the responsible one, lifted. Sarah caught up with me in the parking lot, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a countdown timer. "David, I want you to know this isn't personal," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Tyler just needs consistency right now." I almost laughed. Consistency. Right. "I'm sure he does," I said, climbing into my truck. "Good luck with that." The drive home was peaceful. Eerily so. No sports radio discussing recruiting strategies, no backseat commentary about why certain pitchers were overrated. Just me, the road, and the sudden realization that I could stop for lunch wherever I wanted without checking if they had chicken tenders on the menu. That weekend felt like being on vacation in my own house. I slept past 7 for the first time in years. Ordered Thai food, the really spicy stuff Tyler hates. Watched an entire documentary about World War II without interruption. It was magnificent. Monday rolled around, and I went to work like any other day. Closed 2 deals before noon, had a leisurely lunch with clients instead of rushing back for school pickup duty. My assistant Jennifer even commented that I seemed more relaxed. "Different," she said. "Like you're not carrying the world on your shoulders anymore." Tuesday morning brought the first crack in Sarah's newfound paradise. My phone rang at 8:47 a.m. Whitmore Academy, Tyler's private school. The same school where I'd served on the fundraising committee for 3 years running and personally donated enough money to sponsor half their baseball team's equipment. "Mr. Henderson? This is Patricia Holbrook from the business office. I'm calling regarding Tyler's account. There seems to be some confusion about payment arrangements going forward." I settled back in my office chair, suddenly very interested in this conversation. "What kind of confusion, Patricia?" "Well, with the custody change, we need to clarify who's responsible for tuition payments. The spring semester bill is due next week, and Tyler's mother indicated she'd need to discuss payment plans. We just want to make sure there are no interruptions to Tyler's education. Payment plans. For a woman who'd spent the last year telling anyone who'd listen that I was financially controlling and stingy with child support. I see, I said carefully. What did you tell her? That we'd need confirmation from the primary account holder, that's you, before making any changes to the billing arrangement. Beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. I'll need to review the custody agreement before making any decisions about account changes. Can you give me a week? Of course, Mr. Henderson. Though I should mention, if payment isn't received by Friday, Tyler will need to be temporarily withdrawn until the account is current. After I hung up, I sat there for a full minute just appreciating the cosmic justice of it all. Tyler's tuition was $18,000 per semester. Plus fees. Plus the donation I made every year to keep our legacy family status. Sarah made decent money as a marketing manager, but not private school for a teenager money. Not even close. Tuesday afternoon brought call number 2. Coach Martinez, Tyler's private baseball instructor. The man I'd been paying $200 per session, twice a week, for the past 2 years. Hey Dave, I hate to bother you, but Tyler missed his lesson today and didn't respond to my texts. His mom called and said something about needing to reschedule lessons to a more affordable frequency. I wanted to check with you before making any changes to the schedule. $200, twice a week. That's $1,600 a month. Nearly $20,000 a year. For a kid who'd just told a judge his father never supported his activities. Coach, I think there might be some confusion about the arrangement going forward. Let me get back to you in a few days, okay? Sure thing. You know Tyler's got real potential, Dave. Be ashamed to lose momentum now with recruiting season coming up. Oh, I knew about Tyler's potential. I had spreadsheets documenting his potential. Statistics going back 4 years. Video footage from every tournament. Letters from 3 different college scouts, all interested in a kid whose unsupportive father had somehow managed to get him in front of the right people at the right times. Wednesday morning, today, brought the avalanche. Sarah called at 7:23 a.m., voice tight with panic. David, we need to talk. About Tyler's expenses. I was making coffee, taking my time with the grind settings and water temperature. Funny how you notice little pleasures when you're not rushing around managing someone else's schedule. What about them? The school called about payment. And his pitching coach. And I got a call from Dr. Peterson's office about his sports physical. Apparently, you set up some kind of exclusive arrangement? Dr. Peterson. The sports medicine specialist who'd been monitoring Tyler's shoulder since his growth spurt started affecting his throwing motion. $500 per visit, monthly appointments. Worth every penny to prevent injury, especially for a kid with scholarship potential. I have arrangements with a lot of people, Sarah. Tyler's expensive. David, please. I know we haven't always seen eye to eye, but Tyler shouldn't suffer because of our problems. Our problems? That was rich. Tyler made his choice, Sarah. He told a judge I don't support him. I'm just respecting his decision. That's not, he didn't mean financially. You know that. Actually, I don't know that. What I know is that my son stood up in court and said I don't support his activities. So I'm not going to support his activities. Seems pretty straightforward. The silence stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, David, his tuition alone is $18,000. I can't afford that on my salary. You should have thought of that before coaching him through his testimony. I didn't coach him through anything. Tyler came to that conclusion on his own. Sure he did. Just like he came to the conclusion that living with mom full-time would somehow be better for his consistency and emotional development. Sarah had been playing the long game for months, slowly poisoning Tyler against me with subtle comments about my work schedule and questions about whether I really cared about his happiness. Sarah, I've spent the last 5 years arranging my entire life around Tyler's needs. I've paid for everything from his orthodontics to his SAT prep courses. I've missed client dinners and weekend golf games to sit in bleachers watching him strike out. I've listened to him complain about coaches, teachers, and teammates while writing checks to solve every problem. And when given the chance to acknowledge any of that, he chose to tell a judge that I never support him. My voice stayed level, professional even. Like I was explaining a contract dispute to a client. So now he gets what he asked for. A father who doesn't support his activities. David, please be reasonable. Reasonable. I almost admired her nerve. I am being reasonable. I'm giving Tyler exactly what he said he wanted. Independence from his unsupportive father. What about college? His scholarship opportunities? What about them? Tyler's a smart kid. He'll figure it out. Maybe he'll appreciate the value of having someone in his corner once he doesn't have it anymore. Call number 4 came an hour later. Tyler himself this time, voice small and confused in a way that reminded me of when he was 7 and couldn't understand why his goldfish had stopped swimming. Dad? Mom says there's some problem with my school payments? I leaned back in my chair, studying the family photo on my desk. It was from 2 years ago, at Tyler's travel team championship. He's holding a trophy almost as big as his torso, grinning like he'd conquered the world. I'm standing behind him, hand on his shoulder, wearing the Team Dad polo shirt I'd bought to fit in with the other parents. Looking at that photo now, I noticed something I'd missed before. Tyler's looking at the camera, but I'm looking at him. Pride written all over my face like I'd just witnessed the eighth wonder of the world. Dad? Are you there? I'm here, Tyler. So, is it true? About the money? What did your mom tell you? That you're not paying for stuff anymore. Because of the custody thing. But that doesn't make sense, right? I mean, you're still my dad. Still his dad. After everything, the court testimony, the public humiliation, the months of being painted as an absent, uncaring father, he was confused that I might actually step back. Tyler, do you remember what you told the judge last Friday? Silence. Long enough that I could practically hear him rewinding the tape in his head, probably realizing for the first time how his words might have sounded from my perspective. I didn't mean. Dad, I was just upset about you missing my game the week before. The one against Riverside. I didn't mean you never support me. The Riverside game. The one I'd missed because of a client emergency that couldn't wait. The same client whose contract renewal had provided the bonus money I'd used to pay for Tyler's tournament fees that summer. But Tyler wouldn't know about that connection. Why would he? He was 16. His world revolved around whatever was happening right in front of him. Tyler, I've missed 3 of your games in 2 years. 3. Out of 47. Do you know why I keep track of that number? No, sir. Because every time I missed one, you made sure I knew about it. And every time, I rearranged my schedule to make sure it didn't happen again. But somehow, when you were talking to that judge, those 3 games were all you could remember. Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't think. That's the problem, Tyler. You didn't think. About the private lessons, or the equipment, or the camps, or the travel teams. You didn't think about the college fund I've been building since you were 8, or the connections I've made with recruiters, or the hours I've spent learning about baseball strategies so I could actually understand what you were talking about when you got home from practice. My voice cracked slightly on that last part. Because that was the truth I hadn't wanted to admit, even to myself. I'd learned to love baseball because Tyler loved baseball. Spent countless hours studying the game I'd never cared about as a kid, just so I could be the father my son needed. But Tyler, here's what I realized sitting in that courtroom. You don't want a father who supports your activities. You want a father who stays in his lane, who doesn't ask questions or have opinions or expectations. You want someone to write checks and stay quiet. And that's not who I am. That's not. I don't want that, Dad. Then why did you tell a judge that I don't support you? Why did you ask to live with your mother full time? Why did you make me out to be some kind of villain who doesn't care about your happiness? The silence stretched so long I wondered if he'd hung up. Finally, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, because Mom said you'd fight for me if you really wanted me around. There it was. The truth that Sarah had probably been feeding him for months. The idea that love was measured in courtroom battles, that a father who truly cared would never let his son go without a fight. Tyler, fighting for you would have meant making you choose sides in public. It would have meant airing out every private conversation, every financial record, every personal detail of our family's life. It would have meant turning you into a weapon in a war you didn't start. Is that what you wanted? No, sir. Good. Because that's not what fathers do. Fathers protect their children from wars, they don't drag them into the middle of them. I could hear him crying now, soft sniffles that broke my heart and made me furious at the same time. This was what Sarah's manipulation had accomplished. A confused, guilty 16-year-old who'd been used as a pawn in a custody game he never fully understood. So what happens now? He asked. Now you live with your mom, like you wanted. And you learn what it's like when decisions have consequences. But Dad, I can't afford, Mom can't afford all the stuff you paid for. That's not my problem anymore, Tyler. You made your choice. Now you get to live with it. Please, Dad. I didn't know. About the money, I mean. I didn't realize how much everything cost. Of course he didn't. That was the point. I'd spent 5 years making sure he never had to worry about money, never had to choose between opportunities because of cost, never had to feel like his dreams were limited by our finances. I'd wanted him to focus on being a kid, on playing baseball and getting good grades and figuring out who he wanted to become. But in protecting him from financial reality, I'd accidentally made myself invisible. Every tournament fee paid without discussion, every piece of equipment bought without complaint, every opportunity provided without strings attached, it had all blended into background noise in his teenage brain. Tyler, do you know what your annual expenses are? Just for activities and school? No, sir. $43,000. That's more than a lot of people make in a year, son. And that doesn't include basic stuff like food, housing, insurance, or clothes. That's just the extras. The things that make you competitive. I heard him suck in a breath. 43,000 probably sounded like $1 billion to a 16-year-old. Now, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because you're old enough to understand that choices have costs. And when you chose to live with your mother, you chose her ability to provide for those costs. Dad, please. I'll apologize to the judge. I'll tell him I made a mistake. Tyler, family court doesn't work like that. You can't just take back your testimony because you discovered it has consequences. Then what am I supposed to do? The question hung in the air like smoke. What was he supposed to do? Get a job at 16 to pay for his own private coaching? Accept that his competitive baseball career was probably over? Watch his college scholarship dreams evaporate because his family could no longer afford to keep him competitive? Part of me, the father part that had spent 5 years sacrificing for this kid, wanted to cave immediately. To tell him it would all be okay, that daddy would fix everything like I always did. To transfer the money and maintain the arrangements and pretend that his courtroom testimony had been just a teenage mistake with no lasting impact. But the other part of me, the part that had been systematically undermined and devalued for months, knew that would be the worst thing I could do. Tyler needed to learn that words have power, that public declarations have private consequences, that you can't tear someone down and then expect them to keep building you up. Tyler, I love you more than anything in this world. But I'm not going to keep supporting activities for someone who publicly declared that I don't support him. That's not punishment, that's just logic. So that's it? You're just done with me? I'm not done with you. But I am done being taken for granted. I'm done having my contributions treated like they don't matter. I'm done being cast as the villain in your story when I've been the hero behind the scenes for years. Dad, I never meant to make you feel like a villain. But you did, Tyler. In front of a judge, in front of your mother's lawyer, in front of a courtroom full of strangers. You made me out to be neglectful and unsupportive. So now I'm going to be exactly what you said I was. The call ended with Tyler sobbing and me staring at my coffee mug, wondering if I was being brilliant or cruel. Probably both. Call number 5 came at lunch. Sarah again, this time with backup. I could hear Tyler in the background, still sniffling. David, we need to work something out. Tyler understands now. He knows he made a mistake. Sarah, let me ask you something. If Tyler had stood up in that courtroom and told the judge you were a terrible mother who never listened to him or cared about his needs, would you keep paying his expenses after losing custody? That's different. How? Because I'm his mother. And I'm his father. The father he publicly disowned. The father whose support he denied under oath. David, please. Think about Tyler's future. I have been thinking about Tyler's future. For the past 5 years, it's basically all I've thought about. But Tyler made it clear that he doesn't value my investment in his future. So I'm redirecting my investments elsewhere. What does that mean? It means Tyler can apply for financial aid like any other kid whose parents can't afford private school. It means he can try out for his public school's baseball team and see how he competes without private coaching. It means he can learn what it's like to work for things instead of having them handed to him. You're destroying his chances. Sarah, I built his chances. From the ground up. I researched the best programs, networked with the right coaches, invested in his development when he was too young to even understand what development meant. I created his chances. And when given the opportunity to acknowledge that, he chose to pretend it never happened. He was angry. Teenagers say stupid things when they're angry. Then teenagers deal with the consequences of saying stupid things. That's how they learn not to say them anymore. Call number 6 happened while I was driving home. Tyler's pitching coach again, this time sounding desperate. Dave, Tyler's mom called and tried to set up a payment plan for half sessions once a month. Half sessions, Dave. You know that's not going to help him maintain his velocity, right? Not with showcase season coming up. Showcase season. Where college recruiters made their final evaluations for next year's recruiting class. The culmination of everything Tyler had worked toward since he was 12. Coach, Tyler's development is no longer my responsibility. What does that mean? Did something happen between you guys? Tyler decided he doesn't need his father's support. So he's not getting it. Dave, I've been coaching kids for 15 years. Whatever happened between you two, don't let it derail Tyler's future. The kid's got legitimate Division I potential. Division I. Full scholarship potential. The golden ticket that could set Tyler up for life, college paid for, connections made, doors open that most kids never even know exist. Coach, let me tell you something about potential. It only matters if someone's willing to invest in developing it. Tyler made it clear that he doesn't value my investments. So I'm not making them anymore. But Dave, coach, I've got another call coming in. I didn't, but I couldn't keep listening to him plead Tyler's case. Because he was right. Tyler did have Division I potential. And I was probably destroying it out of pure, stubborn pride. That night, I sat in my home office looking at Tyler's college fund statement. $57,000, carefully saved and invested over 8 years. Money that was supposed to be a surprise for his 18th birthday, a safety net that would have let him focus on school instead of worrying about student loans. Next to the investment statement was a folder full of recruiting letters. 17 different colleges had expressed interest in Tyler over the past year. Not just small schools desperate for players, but legitimate programs with winning traditions and strong academic reputations. All of it built on a foundation I'd provided. The coaching, the equipment, the tournament exposure, the carefully managed schedule that let Tyler focus on development instead of worrying about logistics. I'd been the infrastructure that made everything else possible. And now Tyler was about to learn what happened when that infrastructure disappeared. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "David, please call me. We need to find a solution that works for everyone." Everyone. As if Tyler's public humiliation of me was just a minor hiccup that everyone needed to work around. As if I was being unreasonable by taking him at his word. I texted back, "Tyler made his decision. Now he lives with it." Her response came immediately, "You're hurting an innocent kid to get back at me." Innocent. That was the word that made me put the phone down and walk away. Because Tyler wasn't innocent. He was 16, old enough to understand the weight of his words, old enough to know that actions have consequences. Old enough to have thought about what he was saying before he said it. But he was also young enough to be manipulated. Young enough to believe that love was supposed to be unconditional and support was supposed to be automatic. Young enough to think that he could tear down the person who'd built his entire world and expect that person to keep building. Thursday morning brought the call I'd been expecting. Judge Morrison's clerk, asking if I could come in for an emergency hearing. Apparently, Sarah had filed some kind of motion claiming that my withdrawal of financial support was a form of child abandonment. "Mr. Henderson, can you be here at 2 o'clock? I checked my calendar. 2 client meetings and a conference call with investors. I'll be there." Walking back into that courtroom felt like stepping into a parallel universe. Same disinfectant smell, same fluorescent lighting, same worn carpet that had probably absorbed decades of family drama. But this time, I wasn't the defendant hoping to maintain a relationship with my son. I was the respondent being accused of abandoning him. Sarah sat at the same table, same lawyer beside her, but now she looked desperate where before she looked confident. Tyler sat in the gallery behind her, shoulders hunched, staring at his hands. He looked smaller somehow, younger than he had just 6 days earlier. Judge Morrison reviewed the motion with the weary expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario play out countless times. "Ms. Henderson, you're claiming that your ex-husband's cessation of financial support constitutes a form of child abandonment?" Sarah's lawyer stood up, crisp and professional. "Your Honor, Mr. Henderson has unilaterally withdrawn all financial support for Tyler's educational and extracurricular activities. This represents a dramatic change in the child's living circumstances and directly impacts his welfare and future opportunities. Mr. Henderson, how do you respond?" I stood slowly, no lawyer beside me this time. Just me and the truth. "Your Honor, I provided financial support for Tyler's activities because I believed he valued that support. Last Friday, Tyler testified under oath that I don't support him. I'm simply adjusting my behavior to match his stated perception. Mr. Henderson, surely you understand that a teenager's emotional testimony shouldn't dictate practical financial arrangements?" "Your Honor, Tyler didn't offer emotional testimony. He offered factual claims. He stated that I never support his activities. If that's a true statement, then my financial contributions to his activities were apparently invisible to him. If it's a false statement, then Tyler committed perjury in this courtroom." The judge blinked. Twice. I don't think he'd expected me to frame it quite that way. "Which is it, Your Honor? Was Tyler telling the truth about my lack of support, or was he lying under oath?" Sarah's lawyer jumped up. "Your Honor, this is clearly a semantic manipulation. No, Counselor, I think Mr. Henderson raises a valid point." Judge Morrison turned back to me. "Mr. Henderson, are you saying you'll resume financial support if Tyler recants his testimony?" "No, Your Honor. I'm saying that Tyler made a choice about what kind of father he wanted. He chose to have a father who doesn't support his activities. I'm giving him exactly what he asked for, even if it damages his future prospects." "Your Honor, Tyler's future prospects were built entirely on support I provided. If that support was as invisible and valueless as Tyler claimed, then removing it shouldn't change anything." The silence in that courtroom was deafening. Even Tyler looked up from his hands, meeting my eyes for the first time since his testimony the week before. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. Mr. Henderson, I'm going to ask you directly. Do you believe you're acting in Tyler's best interests? The question hit like a physical blow. Because the honest answer was complicated. Was I acting in Tyler's best interests? Or was I acting in my own interests, finally standing up for myself after years of being taken for granted? Your Honor, Tyler is 16 years old. In 2 years, he'll be an adult making his own decisions about college, career, relationships, and finances. Right now, he believes that support should be automatic and consequences shouldn't exist. If I continue to provide financial support after being publicly demeaned, what lesson does that teach him about responsibility and accountability? So this is about teaching Tyler a lesson? This is about respecting Tyler's autonomy. He made a choice about our relationship. I'm honoring that choice. Even though he was likely coached or influenced in making that choice? I glanced at Sarah, who had the decency to look uncomfortable. Your Honor, if Tyler was coached into saying things he didn't mean, that's an even bigger problem. It means he's willing to perjure himself to please someone else. How does rewarding that behavior help him become a man of integrity? Judge Morrison studied me for a long moment. Mr. Henderson, I'm going to give you one more chance to reconsider. Tyler is still your son. His mistakes shouldn't derail his entire future. Your Honor, Tyler's future isn't derailed. It's just going to look different than he planned. He can still play baseball. He can still go to college. He can still achieve everything he wants to achieve. He'll just have to work harder for it, and value it more when he gets it. And if he can't achieve those things without your financial support? Then he'll learn that some opportunities only come once, and some words can't be taken back. The judge looked at Tyler, then at Sarah, then back at me. Mr. Henderson, I can't order you to pay for voluntary activities, but I strongly encourage you to consider the long-term impact of your decision. I have, Your Honor. For the past week, I've thought about very little else. Very well. Motion denied. Mr. Henderson is not legally obligated to provide financial support beyond basic necessities, which are covered by child support payments. Walking out of that courthouse the second time felt different. Heavier. More final. Tyler caught up with me in the parking lot, jogging to keep pace with my longer strides. Dad, wait. Please. I stopped beside my truck, key in hand. What is it, Tyler? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I didn't mean what I said last week. I was just angry because you missed my game, and Mom kept asking if I felt like you prioritized work over me, and I said what I thought would make her happy. There it was. The confession I'd been waiting for. Tyler had been coached, just like I'd suspected. Sarah had spent months planting seeds of doubt, asking leading questions, creating an environment where Tyler felt like he had to choose sides. But that almost made it worse. Because it meant Tyler had thrown me under the bus not because he genuinely felt unsupported, but because he thought it would make his mother happy. He'd destroyed our relationship for politics. Tyler, do you know what's worse than a son who genuinely believes his father doesn't support him? No, sir. A son who knows his father supports him but lies about it anyway. Tyler's face crumpled. Dad, I'm 16. I make stupid mistakes. Please don't punish me for the rest of my life because I said something stupid when I was upset. Tyler, I'm not punishing you. I'm protecting myself. Because if you're willing to lie about me once to make someone else happy, you'll do it again. And I can't keep investing in someone who might betray that investment whenever it's convenient. I would never. You did, Tyler. You already did. So that's it? One mistake and you're done with me forever? Tyler, this wasn't a mistake. Mistakes are accidental. This was a choice. You chose to prioritize your mother's approval over our relationship. You chose to publicly diminish 5 years of my sacrifices. You chose to make me the villain in your story. But I was wrong. I admit I was wrong. Being wrong and being sorry aren't the same thing, Tyler. You're not sorry you hurt me. You're sorry you're facing consequences. He stood there in the parking lot, tears streaming down his face, looking every bit the confused kid he was. Part of me wanted to hug him, to tell him it would all be okay, to fix everything like I always did. But the other part of me, the part that had been systematically undermined for months, knew that would be the worst thing I could do. Tyler needed to learn that relationships have value, that trust once broken takes time to rebuild, that you can't just apologize your way out of consequences. Tyler, I love you. I will always love you. But I'm done being taken for granted. I'm done having my contributions treated as invisible. I'm done being the safety net for someone who's willing to push me off a cliff. Dad, please. I'll do anything. There's nothing to do, Tyler. You made your choice. Now you live with it. I drove home through afternoon traffic, listening to talk radio and trying not to think about Tyler standing in that parking lot, watching his father drive away. But I couldn't shake the image of his face, shocked, devastated, finally understanding that actions have consequences. That night, Sarah called one more time. Her voice was different now, quieter, stripped of the righteous anger that had carried her through months of custody battles. "David, I need to tell you something. About Tyler's testimony." "I already know, Sarah. He told me you coached him." "Not coached. Not exactly. But I may have influenced him. Without meaning to." "How?" "I was angry. About the divorce, about custody, about feeling like you were using money to control our relationship. So when Tyler would complain about you missing a game or being distracted during dinner, I'd validate those feelings. I'd ask questions that made him think more critically about your priorities." "Questions like what?" "Like whether he felt prioritized. Whether your work commitments were more important than his activities. Whether you would fight for him if you really wanted him around." There it was. The systematic erosion of my relationship with Tyler, dressed up as maternal concern and emotional validation. Sarah had turned my son against me not through lies, but through leading questions that focused his attention on my imperfections while ignoring my contributions. "Sarah, do you have any idea what you've done?" I know I screwed up. I was hurt and angry, and I let that influence how I talked to Tyler about you. I didn't think he'd take it so far." "You didn't think he'd take it so far?" "Sarah, you spent months undermining my relationship with my son, and you're surprised he chose you over me?" "David, I'm sorry. I'm truly sorry. But please don't let Tyler suffer because I made a mistake." "Tyler's not suffering because you made a mistake. Tyler's suffering because he made a choice. A choice you influenced, yes, but a choice he made with his own voice in front of a judge. He's 16, David. He doesn't understand the full consequences of his actions. Then maybe it's time he learned." I hung up and sat in my empty house, thinking about consequences and choices and the difference between love and enablement. Because that's what this had become. Years of loving Tyler so much that I'd shielded him from every difficulty, solved every problem, smoothed every path. In trying to give Tyler everything, I'd accidentally taught him to value nothing. In trying to be the perfect supportive father, I'd made my support invisible. In trying to protect him from consequences, I'd prevented him from learning responsibility. Maybe the most loving thing I could do now was let Tyler experience the weight of his choices. Let him understand that relationships require investment from both sides. Let him learn that words have power and trust has value. 6 months later, I got a letter. Handwritten, on notebook paper, with Tyler's careful script filling both sides. "Dad, I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I needed to write this. I've been thinking about what happened in court every day since it happened, and I finally understand what you were trying to teach me. Living with Mom full-time has been harder than I thought it would be. Not because she's not a good mom, but because I finally understand how much you did that I never noticed. I had to quit the travel team. Mom couldn't afford the fees, and when I asked about getting a job to help pay for it, she said I needed to focus on school. But then I realized that's exactly what you always said, that my job was to be a student and an athlete, and your job was to make that possible. I made varsity at my new school, which felt good until I realized the competition level is completely different. The pitching coach there knows baseball, but he's not Coach Martinez. He can't break down my mechanics the way Coach Martinez could. I can feel myself getting worse instead of better. The worst part is that I know exactly why. You didn't just pay for things, Dad. You researched them. You found the best coaches, the best programs, the best opportunities. You didn't just write checks, you built my entire development system. And I never even noticed until it was gone. I got accepted to state with a partial academic scholarship. Not athletic, apparently my showcase performance last spring wasn't strong enough for baseball money. Mom was excited about the scholarship until she saw that it only covers about 60% of costs. Then she started talking about community college and working part-time. There's nothing wrong with community college. But I know that if I'd kept my mouth shut in court, I'd probably be choosing between Division I programs right now instead of figuring out how to afford state. I've been working at the sporting goods store downtown after school. Minimum wage, but it's something. Yesterday, a dad came in with his kid to buy a new glove. The kid was maybe 12, complaining that his current glove was fine and he didn't need a new one. The dad just smiled and said, "Trust me, you'll appreciate it when you're older." That's when I finally got it. You weren't just buying me stuff. You were investing in my future before I was old enough to understand what that meant. And instead of appreciating it, I took it for granted. Instead of thanking you, I complained when you couldn't do even more. I know you probably think I'm only writing this because I want you to pay for college. And maybe part of me does want that. But mostly I just want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I threw away, and I understand why you couldn't just forgive me and pretend it never happened. I don't know if you'll ever want to have a relationship with me again. I hope you will, someday. But even if you don't, I needed you to know that I finally see what you did for me. All of it. And I'm sorry it took losing it to make me understand how much it meant. I love you, Dad. I know I don't deserve to say that anymore, but it's true. Tyler. P.S. I found the college fund statement in Mom's papers when she was trying to figure out financial aid. $57,000. I can't believe you saved that much from me without ever mentioning it. I can't believe I almost threw that away too. I read the letter 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee that went cold while I processed Tyler's words. The handwriting was the same, but the voice was completely different. Humbler. More thoughtful. More aware of the world beyond his own immediate needs. Part of me felt vindicated. Tyler finally understood what he'd lost, finally appreciated what I'd provided, finally grasped the full scope of his choices and their consequences. The father in me wanted to rush to his school, write a check to State University, and restore everything to the way it was before. But the other part of me, the part that had spent 6 months learning to live without the constant pressure of being Tyler's safety net, wasn't ready to go backward. I called Sarah that evening. She answered on the first ring, like she'd been waiting by the phone. David? Did you get Tyler's letter? I got it. And? And what, Sarah? What exactly are you expecting me to say? I don't know. That you forgive him? That you'll help with college? That you two can start over? Sarah, Tyler wrote a beautiful letter. He's clearly learned from his experience. But learning from consequences and escaping consequences aren't the same thing. David, he's grown up so much in the past 6 months. He has a job now, he's more responsible, he understands the value of money. Isn't that what you wanted? It was what I'd wanted. But wanting Tyler to learn responsibility and actually watching him struggle to afford his future were two very different things. The theoretical lesson was one thing, the practical reality of watching my son's opportunities shrink because of a choice he'd made at 16 was harder than I'd expected. Sarah, can I ask you something honestly? Of course. If Tyler hadn't gotten that partial scholarship, if community college was his only option, would you be calling me? Or would you figure out a way to make it work? The silence stretched long enough to give me my answer. David, I can't afford state on my own. You know that. I know that. But 6 months ago, you were convinced that Tyler would be better off with just you providing for him. That my contributions were somehow harmful or controlling. What changed? Tyler changed. I changed. We both learned that it takes more than love to provide opportunities. It takes resources we don't have. Resources I have. Yes. Resources that Tyler publicly stated he doesn't need because his father never supports him. David, please. How long are you going to punish him for one mistake? One mistake. Even now, Sarah couldn't quite grasp that Tyler's testimony hadn't been a mistake. It had been a calculated choice, influenced by her months of coaching, designed to achieve a specific outcome in court. Sarah, I'm not punishing Tyler. I'm letting him live with his choices. There's a difference. What would it take? For you to help him with college? The question hung in the air like a challenge. What would it take? An apology? A public recantation? A promise that he'd never take me for granted again? Sarah, let me ask you this. If I pay for Tyler's college, what guarantee do I have that he won't decide I'm controlling or unsupportive again when it's convenient? You don't have any guarantee. That's what trust is. Trust is earned, Sarah. Tyler spent 5 years earning my trust, then destroyed it in one afternoon. Why should I assume he won't do it again? Because he's learned from his mistake. Has he? Or has he learned that his mistakes have consequences, and he doesn't like consequences? The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in 6 months. I drove to Tyler's school and waited in the parking lot until he came out. He walked differently now, less of the casual confidence that comes from knowing someone else is handling all the logistics of your life. More aware of his surroundings, more purposeful. When he saw my truck, he stopped walking entirely. For a moment, I thought he might turn around and go back inside. Instead, he walked over slowly, like he was approaching a dangerous animal. Hi, Dad. Tyler. Get in. We drove in silence for 10 minutes before I pulled into the parking lot of the baseball complex where Tyler used to have his private lessons. The same fields where I'd spent countless hours watching him develop, watching him improve, watching him grow into the player who'd attracted 17 college scouts. Dad, why are we here? Because this is where it started, Tyler. Your development as a player. Do you remember your first lesson here? Yeah. I was terrible. Coach Martinez spent an hour just teaching me how to hold the ball properly. You were 12. And you cried in the car afterward because you thought you'd never be good enough to play in high school. Tyler's face softened at the memory. You told me that being good at something and being ready to be good at something were different things. Do you remember what else I told you? That talent without investment was just potential. And potential without development was just a waste. Right. And who made the investment, Tyler? You did. And who benefited from that investment? I did. And when you had the chance to acknowledge that investment, what did you do? Tyler's voice got very quiet. I pretended it never happened. We sat in the parking lot, watching other kids work with their coaches, other fathers making the same investments I'd once made. The scene was achingly familiar, parents standing along the fence, watching their children chase dreams that cost more than most people's cars. Tyler, I got your letter. I meant every word of it, Dad. I believe you did. But here's what I need you to understand. You're not sorry because you hurt me. You're sorry because you hurt yourself. And those are two different kinds of sorry. That's not true. Isn't it? If your partial scholarship had been a full ride, if community college wasn't staring you in the face, would you have written that letter? Tyler thought about that for a long moment. I don't know. Maybe not right now. But eventually, yes. Because I've learned things about myself that I needed to learn. What kind of things? That I was spoiled. That I took you for granted. That I never really understood how much work you put into my life. Those are good things to learn, Tyler. But they're things you learned because you faced consequences. If I step in now and fix everything, what happens to those lessons? They don't go away, Dad. I can't unknow what I know now. Can't you? Tyler, you're 18 years old. You've got 70 years ahead of you. You think you'll remember how this feels when you're 25? 30? When you have kids of your own? Yes. I hope you're right. But hope isn't a strategy, Tyler. And trust isn't automatically renewed just because someone says they've learned their lesson. We talked for another hour in that parking lot. About choices and consequences, about trust and forgiveness, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Tyler listened more than he talked, which was itself a sign of how much he'd changed. Finally, I turned to him directly. Tyler, I'm going to make you an offer. But I need you to understand that it's not the same offer I would have made 6 months ago. Okay. I'll match whatever you can save for college. Dollar for dollar. You work, you save, I'll double it. You get academic scholarships, I'll match those too. You want state university? Earn half of it, and I'll provide the other half. Tyler's face went through a range of emotions, relief, gratitude, and then something that looked almost like disappointment. Dad, that's generous. But I can't earn $20,000 a year working part-time at a sporting goods store. Then you'll need to get creative. Summer jobs, academic scholarships, financial aid, student loans. The same things other kids do when their parents can't afford to write the full check. But you can afford to write the full check. That's not the point, Tyler. The point is that you need to have skin in the game. You need to invest in your own future so you understand its value. What if I can't do it? What if I can't earn enough? Then you'll go to community college for 2 years and transfer. Or you'll take a gap year and work full-time. Or you'll find a different path entirely. The same options that were always available to kids whose fathers actually don't support them. Tyler sat quietly for a few minutes, processing the offer. It wasn't what he'd wanted, a full restoration of his previous life, but it was more than he'd had an hour earlier. Dad, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you forgive me? The question hit harder than I'd expected. Because forgiveness wasn't really the issue. I'd forgiven Tyler months ago, probably within days of his testimony. The issue was trust, respect, and the value of investment. Tyler, I forgave you before you even asked for forgiveness. But forgiveness and restoration aren't the same thing. Forgiveness is about letting go of anger. Restoration is about rebuilding what was broken. And that takes time. How much time? I don't know. Maybe years. Maybe never. That depends on you. What do I have to do? You have to prove that you understand the value of what you lost. Not just with words, but with actions. You have to show me that you're someone I can invest in again without worrying that you'll throw it back in my face when it's convenient. Tyler nodded slowly. Dad, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could we maybe have dinner sometime? Just to talk? The request was small, simple, and somehow more meaningful than anything else he'd said. Not asking for money or help or solutions. Just asking for time. For relationship. For the chance to rebuild what he'd torn down. Tyler, I'd like that. Really? Really? But Tyler? Yes, sir? We split the check. For the first time in months, Tyler laughed. Actually laughed, not the polite chuckle he'd perfected for adults, but the genuine sound of a kid who'd just heard something unexpectedly funny. Deal, Dad. Deal. As I drove home that afternoon, I thought about second chances and earned forgiveness and the difference between loving someone and trusting them. Tyler had a long road ahead of him, working to afford college, proving his maturity, rebuilding our relationship brick by careful brick. But for the first time since that courtroom testimony, I felt hopeful. Not because Tyler had apologized, but because he'd accepted responsibility. Not because he'd asked for my help, but because he'd accepted my conditions. Not because he wanted me to fix his problems, but because he was finally ready to work alongside me to solve them. The 16-year-old who'd stood up in court and declared that his father never supported him was gone. In his place was an 18-year-old who understood the weight of words, the value of investment, and the cost of choices. It wasn't the ending I'd planned when this all started. But it was an ending I could live with. And maybe, with time and effort and mutual respect, it could become a beginning too. My phone buzzed with a text from Tyler. "Thanks for today, Dad. And thanks for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on you." I texted back, "See you Sunday for dinner. And Tyler? Bring your appetite. We have a lot of catching up to do." Sometimes the most generous thing a father can do is absolutely nothing. But sometimes, just sometimes, the most powerful thing he can do is offer a second chance with new rules. Tyler was about to learn the difference between being supported and earning support. And I was about to learn whether my son had truly grown into someone worthy of my investment. Only time would tell. But for the first time in months, I was looking forward to finding out. Story 3.
At my mother's funeral, as I sobbed, my husband gripped my arm and hissed, "Stop crying. You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues." When I looked at him in shock, he just straightened his tie and walked away with a disgusted look. That same night, he handed me divorce papers and said, "I'm leaving you for your sister, she looks better in black than you do." His mother nodded and added, "We always preferred her anyway, dear." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just smiled and said, "Congratulations, you've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." That was 2 months ago. This morning, I woke up to desperate pounding on my front door, both of them begging me to stop what I'd just started. You want to know what rock bottom looks like? It's standing at your mother's graveside in a cheap black dress while your husband of 8 years tells you to stop embarrassing him in front of his work friends. I'm not kidding. That actually happened. Mom had been sick for 3 years, cancer that ate through our savings faster than it ate through her body. I'd been her primary caregiver because, surprise, my sister Veronica was too busy with her modeling career to help. Air quotes definitely intended. Veronica's modeling career consisted mainly of Instagram posts and waitressing at an upscale restaurant where she flirted with married men for bigger tips. But there I was, mascara streaming down my face like some tragic painting, when Marcus grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises. His fingers dug into the same spot where I'd bumped into Mom's hospital bed rail the week before. The pain shot straight through me, sharp and immediate, like reality finally breaking through the fog of grief. "Stop crying," he hissed through his perfect white teeth. "You're embarrassing me in front of my colleagues." I turned to look at him, really look at him, and for the first time in years, I saw him clearly. His perfectly styled hair, his expensive suit that cost more than Mom's last month of medication, his cold gray eyes that held about as much warmth as a moored freezer. When had he become this person? Or had he always been this way, and I'd just been too busy loving him to notice? The autumn wind whipped through the cemetery, carrying the smell of dying leaves and fresh earth from Mom's grave. I could hear his co-workers murmuring behind us, probably wondering why the grieving daughter couldn't pull herself together for their comfort. The nerve of me, making my mother's funeral about my actual feelings. He didn't wait for an answer. Just straightened his tie like he was adjusting his armor and walked away with this look of pure disgust. Like I was something unpleasant he'd stepped in. His Italian leather shoes clicked against the concrete path as he rejoined his colleagues, probably apologizing for my unseemly display of human emotion. That night, while I sat at my kitchen table staring at the leftover funeral reception food that nobody had touched, casseroles from neighbors who'd watched me care for Mom alone, flowers from friends who'd seen me grow thinner and more exhausted with each passing month, he came home with papers. Not flowers. Not an apology. Legal documents. The house felt different somehow. Colder. Like all the warmth had been sucked out of it the moment he walked through the door. I should have known something was wrong by the way he moved, purposeful, decisive, like a man who'd already made up his mind about something terrible. "I'm filing for divorce," he announced, dropping the folder on the table like he was delivering a business proposal. The papers scattered across the wood surface, official and final. "I'm leaving you for Veronica. She looks better in black than you do. I swear, My brain actually made that record scratch sound you hear in movies. You know the one. The sound of a life coming to a sudden, violent halt. "Excuse me?" I managed to croak out, my voice barely above a whisper. That's when his mother, sweet, gray-haired Eleanor, who'd always insisted I call her Mom, stepped out from behind him like some kind of evil fairy materializing from thin air. She'd been hiding in the hallway like a coward, listening to her son destroy what was left of my world. "We always preferred her anyway, dear," she said with this sickeningly sweet smile. "Veronica has such lovely bone structure. And she's not nearly as emotional as you." Emotional. Right. Because grieving your dead mother is apparently a character defect. Because crying at funerals is a social faux pas. Because having feelings makes you inferior to a woman who'd been sleeping with your husband behind your back for who knows how long. The kitchen light flickered overhead, the bulb I'd been meaning to replace but never had time for because I was too busy managing Mom's care schedule, her medications, her doctor appointments. The sound it made was like a dying insect, buzzing and desperate. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, processing this information. My husband was leaving me for my sister. On the day we buried my mother. With his mother's blessing. It was like someone had taken my life and fed it through a paper shredder, then set the pieces on fire just to watch them burn. But here's the thing, I didn't scream. I didn't throw the funeral casseroles at their heads, though the thought definitely crossed my mind. The green bean casserole from Mrs. Patterson next door looked particularly satisfying to hurl. I didn't even cry, which probably confused them since they'd just spent the day criticizing my tears. Instead, I smiled. Not a nice smile, mind you. The kind of smile that makes people take a step backward without knowing why. The kind of smile that should have warned them they were standing on very thin ice. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steady as a surgeon's hand. "You've just made the biggest mistake of your lives." Marcus laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed off the kitchen walls, harsh and grating. "What are you going to do, Sarah? Sue me? I make 3 times what you do. My family has money. You're a grief counselor who couldn't even keep her own mother alive." The words hit me like physical blows. Each one calculated to wound, to diminish, to reduce me to nothing in his eyes. Eleanor nodded sagely, like he just delivered some profound wisdom instead of the cruelest thing anyone had ever said to me. "We'll see," I said. They left that night, probably to celebrate their victory with champagne and whatever other cliché things terrible people do when they think they've won. I sat alone in the house Marcus and I had bought together 5 years ago, back when we were happy, or at least when I thought we were, surrounded by sympathy cards and wilting flowers. The silence was deafening. I poured myself a glass of wine, Mom's favorite, a bottle I'd been saving for some special occasion that would never come, and I started planning. See, there's something my dear husband never bothered to learn about me in 8 years of marriage. I wasn't always a grief counselor. Before I met Marcus, before I got swept up in playing the perfect wife, before I convinced myself that love meant making yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life, I had a different career. One that required a very specific set of skills. I used to work in corporate investigation. Industrial espionage, they call it in the movies. My job was finding out what people didn't want found, exposing secrets that could destroy careers and lives. I was good at it too. Scary good. Good enough that I could have ruined some very powerful people if I'd wanted to. I'd specialized in financial crimes, embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. I knew how to follow paper trails that led nowhere, how to find the connections people thought they'd buried, how to turn whispered rumors into courtroom evidence. I'd put 3 CEOs in prison and saved countless companies from internal theft. But I'd walked away from all that when I fell in love with Marcus. He'd said he wanted a wife who was nurturing and supportive, not someone who spent her days digging through other people's garbage, literal and metaphorical. So I'd retrained as a grief counselor, thinking I could still help people, just in a different way. Thinking that love meant sacrifice, that being a good wife meant abandoning who I used to be. Turns out, the skills are surprisingly transferable. And apparently, 8 years of disuse hadn't dulled them at all. That first night, I sat down at my laptop, the same one I'd used to research Mom's treatment options, to find the best doctors, to fight with insurance companies who thought her life wasn't worth their money, and started with the basics. Financial records, employment history, social media accounts. Amazing how much people reveal about themselves online when they think nobody's paying attention. Marcus, for instance, had been having affairs for 3 years. Not just with Veronica, She was apparently just the latest in a long line of conquests. His company credit card showed regular charges at the Marriott downtown every Tuesday afternoon, always followed by purchases at Victoria's Secret. The man was nothing if not predictable in his infidelity. The pattern was so clear it was almost insulting. Same hotel, same time slot, same routine. He'd book a room under his real name, not even trying to hide it, meet his mistress of the month, then buy her something pretty to keep her quiet. The receipts painted a picture of a man who thought he was untouchable, but it gets better. Those work colleagues he was so worried about impressing at Mom's funeral? He'd been embezzling from the company for 2 years, skimming money from client accounts to fund his expensive lifestyle. The Rolex he wore to my mother's funeral, stolen money. The luxury car parked in our driveway, stolen money. The designer clothes he'd worn to tell me I was embarrassing him, all paid for with stolen money. I found spreadsheets hidden in password-protected folders, bank account statements for accounts I'd never known existed, wire transfers to offshore investments that definitely weren't declared on our tax returns. Marcus had been living a double life, and he'd been stupid enough to leave electronic breadcrumbs everywhere. Eleanor wasn't innocent either. Sweet little old Eleanor, who brought me homemade cookies every Christmas and told me I was the daughter she'd never had been running a Medicare fraud scheme out of her charity work at the senior center. She'd been billing insurance companies for physical therapy sessions that never happened, medical equipment that was never delivered, treatments that existed only on paper. She'd made over $200,000 in the past year alone. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been draining my inheritance to pay for Mom's legitimate medical bills, Eleanor had been stealing from the same system to line her own pockets. While I'd been fighting with insurance companies to approve Mom's treatments, Eleanor had been filing false claims and laughing all the way to the bank. And Veronica? My dear sister, who'd been too busy to visit Mom in the hospital, who'd missed every chemo appointment and every family dinner because her career was more important. She'd been selling more than just her modeling photos online. Much more. The kind of content that would definitely get her fired from that upscale restaurant she was so proud of. The kind of content that would make our conservative grandmother roll over in her grave. I found her premium accounts, her private subscriber lists, her business arrangements with men who paid for more than just pictures. All of it documented, all of it traceable, all of it completely contradictory to the innocent image she projected to the world. By dawn, I had enough information to destroy all 3 of them. But I didn't act right away. Revenge, I've learned, is like a fine wine, it's better when you let it age properly. Rush it, and you end up with something bitter and unsatisfying. Take your time, and you can create something truly devastating. Instead, I spent the next 2 months playing the part of the heartbroken, abandoned wife. I signed the divorce papers without protest, even though my lawyer told me I could fight for more. I let them think they'd broken me, that I was too devastated to function, too weak to fight back. I sold the house, our house, where we planned to raise children who never came, where we'd hosted dinner parties for friends who'd apparently always preferred my sister. I moved into a small apartment downtown, close to my grief counseling practice. I let everyone assume I was starting over from nothing. I even attended their pathetic little wedding ceremony. Yes, they got married 6 weeks after my mother's funeral because apparently they have the emotional depth of a puddle. The ceremony was held at Eleanor's country club, the same place where she'd been stealing from Medicare patients. The symbolism was almost too perfect. Marcus looked so smug in his rented tuxedo, like he'd just conquered the world. He kept checking his Rolex, the one bought with embezzled money, and smiling at his groomsmen like he'd pulled off some great coup. Veronica preened in a white dress that cost more than most people's cars, probably paid for with Marcus's stolen funds. She posed for photos with the kind of practiced smile she'd perfected for her online customers. Eleanor dabbed fake tears with a lace handkerchief and told anyone who'd listen how healing this new beginning was for everyone. How sometimes love meant making difficult choices. How she'd always known Marcus and Veronica were meant to be together. The woman should have won an Oscar for that performance. I sat in the back row wearing a simple blue dress, Mom's favorite color, my hands folded in my lap like a good little victim. I even brought a tissue to my eyes a few times, though I was fighting laughter more than tears. The whole thing was so perfectly, ironically tragic. They thought they were the protagonists of their own love story, when really they were just characters in my carefully orchestrated revenge plot. Every smile, every kiss, every toast to their happiness was just another nail in their collective coffin. The reception was held in the club's main dining room, all crystal chandeliers and mahogany panels. I watched Marcus give his speech about finding true love when you least expect it, about how sometimes life takes you in directions you never planned. Veronica giggled at all the right moments, playing the blushing bride to perfection. I stayed just long enough to be seen, to let them think they'd won completely. Then I slipped out during the cake cutting, before anyone could corner me for awkward small talk about how I was holding up. After the ceremony, Marcus actually had the audacity to approach me in the parking lot. His new wife was already in the car, checking her makeup in the visor mirror and probably texting her subscribers about her wedding day content. "I hope this brings you closure, Sarah," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I know this hasn't been easy for you." The nerve of this man. Standing there in his stolen finery, married to my sister at a venue paid for with fraudulent money, talking to me about closure like he was doing me some kind of favor. "Oh, it's brought me something," I replied with my sweetest smile. "Just not closure." He looked confused for a moment, his brow furrowing the way it did when he was trying to work out a problem. But Veronica was already honking the horn, demanding they leave for their honeymoon in Bali. Another purchase that would look very interesting to federal investigators, considering it was paid for with company funds. That was 8 weeks ago. This morning, everything came together beautifully. I woke up at 6 a.m. to the sound of desperate pounding on my front door. Not knocking, pounding, like someone was trying to break it down. The sound echoed through my small apartment, urgent and panicked. I knew immediately who it was. I'd been expecting this visit for weeks. I took my time getting dressed, making coffee, even doing my morning skincare routine. The pounding continued, growing more frantic with each passing minute. I could hear voices now, hushed and desperate, probably trying to figure out if I was home or if I was ignoring them. When I finally opened the door 45 minutes later, I found Marcus and Eleanor standing on my doorstep looking like they aged 10 years overnight. Marcus was still in yesterday's clothes, wrinkled khakis and a polo shirt that looked like he'd slept in them. His perfect hair was disheveled, his face pale and sweaty. Eleanor looked like she'd been crying for hours, her usually immaculate makeup smeared and her hands shaking. "Sarah, we need to talk," Marcus said, his voice shaking in a way I'd never heard before. "Good morning to you too," I replied cheerfully, taking a sip of my perfectly brewed coffee. "Beautiful day, isn't it? Coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "This isn't a joke," Eleanor snapped, then seemed to remember she was supposed to be begging. Her face crumpled, and she tried to rearrange it into something more pleading. "Please, dear. We need your help." I leaned against the doorframe, studying their faces like specimens in a lab. Fear. Panic. The beautiful desperation of people who'd finally realized they weren't as smart as they thought they were. It was almost intoxicating, seeing them stripped of their arrogance, their sense of superiority. "Help with what?" I asked innocently, as if I had no idea why they might be here. Marcus stepped forward, and I noticed his hands were trembling. His voice cracked when he spoke. "The FBI raided my office yesterday morning. They came in like it was some kind of drug bust, agents everywhere, boxes and computers being carried out. They froze all the company accounts, seized my personal assets. They're saying I embezzled money, but I swear, Sarah, I can explain. And the IRS showed up at my house," Eleanor interrupted, her voice cracking like old paint. "They had a warrant, Sarah. A federal warrant. They're auditing the senior center charity, going through every file, every receipt. They think I've been filing false claims. It's all a misunderstanding, but they won't listen." The desperation in their voices was music to my ears. I'd imagined this moment so many times over the past 2 months, but the reality was even sweeter than my fantasies. "Where's Veronica?" I asked, cutting off their explanations. They exchanged a look that would have been funny if it weren't so pathetic. The kind of look that says everything without saying anything at all. "She left," Marcus admitted, the word seeming to physically pain him. "When the FBI showed up at our apartment yesterday afternoon, she packed a bag and disappeared. She said she couldn't be associated with a criminal. She said she had her reputation to think about." Poor Marcus. He really thought she loved him. Even now, even after everything, he couldn't see that Veronica was exactly the kind of person who'd abandon a sinking ship. Just like she'd abandoned Mom when things got hard. Just like she'd abandoned me when I needed family support. Loyalty was never her strong suit. She took the car, Eleanor added bitterly. And cleaned out their joint bank account before she left. Not that there was much left after the FBI froze everything else. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered the way Marcus had grabbed my arm at Mom's funeral. The way Eleanor had smiled while telling me they preferred my sister. The way Veronica had looked right through me like I didn't exist. So let me get this straight, I said, sipping my coffee slowly, savoring both the drink and the moment. The FBI thinks you're an embezzler, the IRS thinks Eleanor's a fraud, and your wife ran away the moment things got difficult. And you came to me because? Because you're the only one who can help us, Marcus said desperately. You used to work in corporate investigation. You know people in law enforcement, in the system. You understand how these things work. We need someone who can prove we're innocent. Eleanor nodded frantically, like a bobblehead doll in the back of a car. Please, Sarah. I know we haven't treated you well. Haven't treated me well? I interrupted, my voice still calm but with an edge now. You told me at my mother's funeral that you always preferred my sister. You stood by while your son served me divorce papers on the worst day of my life. You participated in humiliating me in front of a crowd of people who were supposed to be there to support me in my grief. Eleanor flinched as if I'd slapped her. But family is family, she continued weakly. Blood is thicker than water. I almost laughed out loud at that one. Now we were family? Now blood mattered? Where was that family loyalty when they were humiliating me at my mother's funeral? Where was it when Veronica was sleeping with my husband? Where was it when Eleanor was nodding approvingly at my public humiliation? I see, I said thoughtfully, letting the silence stretch between us. And what makes you think I'd want to help you? Because you're a good person, Marcus said, and he actually sounded like he believed it. Like after everything he'd done, he still thought I was the same naive woman he'd married. I know you're angry with us, and you have every right to be. But you wouldn't let innocent people go to prison. That's not who you are. Innocent. The word hung in the air like a bad smell. You're right, I said finally, watching hope flicker in their eyes like candlelight. I wouldn't let innocent people go to prison. The hope grew stronger. Eleanor even managed a weak smile. But here's the thing, I continued, setting down my coffee cup with deliberate precision. You're not innocent. The hope died instantly, like someone had blown out those candles. Marcus, you've been stealing from your clients for 2 years. 50,000 here, 20,000 there. You thought it was small enough that nobody would notice, but it adds up. $2.3 million, to be exact. Marcus stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. His mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Eleanor, you've been defrauding Medicare for even longer. Physical therapy sessions that never happened, equipment that was never delivered, treatments that existed only on paper. You've stolen over $200,000 from a system designed to help sick elderly people, people like my mother, who needed every cent of legitimate care she could get. The color drained from Eleanor's face until she looked like a ghost. And Veronica, well, let's just say her online activities would make a sailor blush. Premium content, private shows, arrangements with clients that go way beyond photography. All of it carefully documented, all of it completely at odds with the innocent image she's been selling to the world. How do you, Marcus started to ask, know all of this? I smiled that same cold smile I'd given them 2 months ago. The smile that should have warned them they were playing with fire. Because I told you that night that you'd made the biggest mistake of your lives. Did you think I was just going to cry into my pillow and move on? Did you think I was going to fade quietly into the background while you all lived happily ever after? The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could practically see the wheels turning in their heads, trying to process what I was telling them. Eleanor was the first to understand. You did this? I didn't do anything, I said calmly. I simply made sure the right information reached the right people. The FBI, the IRS, the state licensing board for Veronica's restaurant, they all received anonymous tips backed up with very thorough documentation. Professional quality reports with sources, evidence, and clear paper trails leading directly to your crimes. Marcus stumbled backward like I'd hit him. You destroyed us. No, I corrected him. You destroyed yourselves. You chose to steal money. You chose to commit fraud. You chose to have affairs and break your marriage vows. I just expedited the consequences. But why? Eleanor asked, genuine confusion in her voice. Why would you do this to us? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. Why? You want to know why? I stepped closer, and they actually backed away from me like I was dangerous. Maybe I was. Do you know what it feels like to have your husband tell you you're embarrassing him while you're grieving your dead mother? Do you know what it's like to discover that your sister has been sleeping with your husband behind your back for months? To realize that his mother, who you called mom for 8 years, was in on it the whole time. They both went silent, finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd done. I spent 3 years taking care of my dying mother while you, Marcus, were out having affairs with every woman who'd smile at you. I used my inheritance from my father, money that was supposed to secure our future, to pay for her medical bills while you were stealing money to buy Rolexes and fancy cars. And when she finally died, when I was at my absolute lowest point, you decided that was the perfect time to destroy what was left of my life. My voice was still calm, but something sharp had crept into the edges. Something that made them both take another step backward. You didn't just divorce me, Marcus. You could have asked for a divorce like a decent human being, and I would have given it to you. You didn't just want my sister, you could have waited until after I'd had time to grieve my mother. But no. You had to humiliate me. You had to make sure I understood that I was worthless, that I was nothing, that I was so beneath your notice that you felt comfortable destroying me in public. Eleanor started crying again, big ugly sobs that probably would have moved me 2 months ago. Now they just sounded like the soundtrack to my vindication. Please, she begged. We're sorry. We made mistakes, but we don't deserve this. Deserve? I repeated. You think this is about what you deserve? This is about consequences. This is about actions having repercussions. This is about life finally balancing the scales. We can make this right, Marcus said desperately, grasping for any lifeline. I'll pay back every penny I stole. Mom will return all the Medicare money. We'll do community service, we'll make restitution. Whatever you want. What I want, I said, is for you to experience exactly what you put me through. The humiliation, the abandonment, the feeling that the people you trusted most in the world think you're worthless. Sarah, please, do you know what it's like to sit in a funeral home making arrangements for your mother while your husband is in a hotel room with your sister? Do you know what it's like to stand at a graveside and realize that the people who are supposed to love you most are just waiting for you to stop being inconvenient? Marcus opened his mouth to speak, but I held up a hand to stop him. I'm not finished. Do you know what it's like to spend your savings on medical bills while the people who should be helping you are stealing money and living lavish lifestyles? Do you know what it's like to realize that your entire marriage was a lie, that your husband never loved you, that he was just waiting for something better to come along? The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam. 8 years of suppressed hurt, of making myself smaller, of accepting less than I deserved. So no, I continued, I don't think you deserve my help. I think you deserve exactly what's coming to you. Prison time, financial ruin, public humiliation. All of it. Marcus tried one last desperate play. Think about the collateral damage, Sarah. The FBI won't just stop with me. They'll investigate everyone connected to the company. Your friend Linda works there, she could get caught up in this too. Innocent people will get hurt. For a moment, just a moment, I felt a flicker of doubt. Linda was a sweet woman from my grief counseling group who'd lost her husband in a car accident. She worked in Marcus's company's HR department, processing employee benefits and handling payroll. She definitely didn't deserve to get pulled into this mess. But then I remembered the weeks of careful planning I'd put into this. I'd made sure to target only the guilty parties, to provide evidence that would lead investigators straight to the source of the crimes without implicating innocent employees. Linda's clean, I said. I made sure of that before I sent in the tips. The investigation will focus on the financial crimes unit where you work, Marcus, and the specific accounts you've been stealing from. Linda's department handles employee benefits, completely separate from your embezzlement scheme. She'll be fine. His last hope died in his eyes. I could see the exact moment when he realized there was no way out, no angle he hadn't considered, no escape route I hadn't blocked. You're a monster, he whispered. The accusation should have hurt. 6 months ago, it would have devastated me. Now it just bounced off like rain on the windshield. No, I said. I'm just someone who finally learned that being good doesn't mean being weak. That being kind doesn't mean being stupid. And that sometimes, the people who deserve your loyalty the least are the ones who demand it the most. Eleanor was still crying, but now she was looking at me with something like fear. As if she was seeing me clearly for the first time and didn't like what she found. What happens now? She asked in a small voice. Now? Now you face the consequences of your choices. Marcus, you'll probably get 5 to 10 years for embezzlement, depending on your cooperation with the investigation. Eleanor, Medicare fraud is a federal offense, you're looking at serious prison time, probably 3 to 7 years. And Veronica? I shrugged. Well, she's probably already moved on to her next victim. That's what parasites do. We could have been happy, Marcus said suddenly, and for the first time since I'd known him, he sounded genuinely sad instead of just angry. We were happy once, weren't we? The question caught me off guard. For just a moment, I remembered the man I'd fallen in love with 9 years ago. The one who'd brought me coffee in bed and listened to my dreams about helping people process grief. The one who'd promised me forever and made me believe in fairy tales. But that man had been an illusion. A mask this stranger had worn to get what he wanted. No, I corrected him gently. I was happy once. You were just comfortable with having a convenient wife who asked for nothing and gave you everything. There's a difference. We stood there for another minute, the weight of 8 years of marriage and its spectacular destruction hanging between us like smoke. Maybe Marcus was hoping I'd change my mind. Maybe Eleanor was praying for some last-minute reprieve. Maybe they thought this was all some elaborate bluff. But eventually, reality set in. Marcus straightened his shoulders, and for just a moment, I saw a flash of the dignity he'd possessed before greed and selfishness had corrupted him. I guess I underestimated you. Everyone did, I replied. That was your mistake. They turned to leave, walking slowly like people going to their execution. I watched them reach the end of my walkway, their shoulders slumped into defeat. I almost, called out to stop them. Almost offered them some kind of lifeline, some small mercy that might have made their downfall less complete. Then I remembered the way Marcus had looked at me that night in the kitchen, like I was something distasteful he needed to dispose of. The way Eleanor had nodded approvingly while he twisted the knife deeper. The way they'd all acted like my mother's death was an inconvenience to their perfect little affair. Marcus, I called out just as they reached the street. He turned around, hope flickering in his face one last time like a dying flame. Give Veronica my regards when she inevitably comes crawling back, I said. Tell her I said congratulations, she got exactly what she deserves too. His face crumpled completely, and they walked away into what was probably the last morning they'd spend as free people. I watched them go, then closed my door and went back to my coffee. It was still warm. Here's what nobody tells you about revenge, it doesn't feel like the movies make it seem. There's no triumphant music, no sense of closure or justice served. No credits rolling over a satisfied protagonist walking into the sunset. Mostly, it just feels quiet. Like finally setting down a heavy weight you didn't realize you'd been carrying for years. Don't get me wrong, I don't regret what I did. They earned every single consequence heading their way. But I also don't feel the satisfaction I thought I would. Turns out, watching people you once loved destroy themselves is just sad, even when they deserve it. Even when they brought it entirely on themselves. The ironic thing is that Marcus was right about one thing, I am a good person. Good enough that I made sure Linda wouldn't get hurt in the investigation. Good enough that I waited 2 months before acting, giving them plenty of time to come clean on their own. Good enough that I'm probably going to spend the next few weeks wondering if I did the right thing. But here's what I've learned over the past 2 months of planning and waiting, being good doesn't mean being a doormat. It doesn't mean letting people walk all over you because fighting back is uncomfortable. And it definitely doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their own choices, especially when those choices hurt innocent people. My phone started ringing around 10 a.m., reporters who'd somehow gotten hold of the story, investigators who wanted to schedule interviews, probably more family members who suddenly cared about me now that the drama had gone public. I let it all go to voicemail. Let them speculate. Let them write their stories about the quiet grief counselor who took down her cheating husband and his criminal family. I had better things to do than explain myself to strangers. Around noon, I drove to the cemetery where Mom was buried. I hadn't been back since the funeral, partly because I'd been busy planning my revenge, partly because I wasn't sure I could handle seeing her grave without breaking down completely. But today felt different. Today I felt strong enough. I brought fresh flowers, daisies, her favorite, and sat on the little bench facing her headstone. The autumn air was crisp and clean, nothing like the oppressive weight of that terrible day 2 months ago. It's done, Mom, I said out loud, feeling only slightly foolish for talking to a piece of granite. They're going to face justice for what they did. All of them. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for just a moment, I could almost imagine it was her voice whispering approval. Mom had always been the strongest person I knew. She'd raised 2 daughters mostly on her own after Dad died, worked 2 jobs to keep us fed and clothed, never let us see her cry even when things were at their worst. She'd have been proud of me for finally standing up for myself, even if the method was a little unorthodox. She'd left me her recipe box in her will, along with a note that said she was proud of how strong I'd become since Dad's death. She never got to see just how strong, but I think she would have approved. She always said that the kindest thing you could do for some people was let them face the truth about themselves. Consider it done, Mom. I stayed at the cemetery for an hour, just sitting in the quiet and thinking about everything that had led to this moment. About the woman I used to be, naive, trusting, always putting other people's needs before my own. About the woman I'd become, harder, smarter, unwilling to accept less than I deserved. The FBI would probably want to interview me eventually, since I was married to Marcus and might have information about his crimes. I'd tell them the truth, that I had no idea about the embezzlement until after we separated. It wasn't even technically a lie. I suspected something was wrong with our finances, but I didn't have proof until I went looking for it after he left me. When I got home from the cemetery, there was a voicemail from my lawyer. The divorce had been finalized that morning, exactly 60 days after Marcus had served me the papers. Apparently, even the courts wanted to rush this nightmare to its conclusion. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat down to listen to the other messages. 3 reporters, 2 federal investigators, and surprisingly, my old boss from the corporate investigation firm where I used to work. "Sarah, it's David," his familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "I heard what happened with Marcus, the whole town's talking about it. Look, I know this is probably the last thing on your mind right now, but we could use someone with your skills again. Corporate fraud cases are through the roof, and frankly, nobody was ever as good at this as you were. Call me when you're ready." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, having just orchestrated the takedown of 3 criminals, and my old career was calling me back like some kind of twisted fate. But maybe that wasn't irony. Maybe that was justice. Over the next week, the story exploded across local media. Grief counselor's husband arrested in embezzlement scheme. Medicare fraud ring busted at senior center. Social media model flees after FBI raid. The reporters painted me as either a victim or a hero, depending on their angle. Some focused on the tragic betrayal, poor widow loses mother and husband in the same month. Others hinted that I might have had inside knowledge about the crimes, though they couldn't prove anything. I gave exactly one interview, to a local reporter who'd covered Mom's charity work at the hospital. I sat in my small apartment, wearing a simple black sweater, and answered her questions with the same calm precision I'd shown Marcus and Eleanor. "Did you suspect your husband was embezzling money?" she asked. "I knew something was wrong with our finances," I said carefully. "Marcus always handled the money, said I didn't need to worry about it. I trusted him completely. Looking back, I can see there were signs, but when you love someone, you don't want to believe the worst about them. What about your sister's relationship with your husband? Did you know they were having an affair?" I paused, letting genuine pain flicker across my face. I suspected something wasn't right between them, but I never imagined. I mean, she's my sister. I thought she was just being supportive during Mom's illness. I never dreamed she would betray me like that. "How do you feel now that they're all facing criminal charges?" "Sad," I said simply. "These are people I loved, people I trusted with my life. I'm sad that they chose to do these terrible things. I'm sad that my mother died not knowing what kind of people they really were. But I'm also relieved that the truth is finally coming out." The interview aired that evening. I watched myself on TV, looking appropriately devastated and dignified. The perfect victim. The woman who'd been betrayed by everyone she loved but was somehow finding the strength to move forward. It was a masterful performance, if I do say so myself. Marcus's trial started 6 weeks later. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery with my hands folded in my lap, occasionally dabbing at my eyes with tissues. The prosecution painted him as a man who'd stolen from elderly clients to fund an extravagant lifestyle. His defense attorney tried to argue that it was all a misunderstanding, that the money transfers were legitimate business expenses. But the evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, email communications, witness testimony from co-workers who'd noticed irregularities. The FBI had done their job thoroughly, following every lead I provided them. On the witness stand, Marcus looked smaller than I remembered. His expensive suits had been replaced with an ill-fitting gray one that his mother had probably bought from a discount store. His perfect hair was unkempt, his confidence shattered. When the prosecutor asked him about his marriage to me, he actually started crying. Sarah was a good wife, he said, his voice cracking. She deserved better than what I gave her. I was selfish and stupid, and I destroyed the best thing in my life for nothing. For a moment, just a moment, I felt something that might have been pity. Then I remembered him grabbing my arm at Mom's funeral, and the feeling passed. Eleanor's trial was even more devastating. The prosecution brought in elderly victims who'd been denied legitimate care because of her fraudulent claims. One man testified that his wife had been waiting for months for physical therapy approval while Eleanor was billing Medicare for fake sessions and pocketing the money. "My wife died waiting for treatment that might have helped her," he said from the witness stand, his voice shaking with rage. While this woman was stealing money that should have gone to help sick people like her. Eleanor sobbed through most of her trial, insisting she'd never meant to hurt anyone. But intent doesn't matter much when the evidence is clear and the victims are real. Veronica never came back. She disappeared completely, probably reinvented herself in some other city with some other name. The authorities were still looking for her, but she'd had a head start and apparently more sense than her accomplices. In a way, her escape was the most fitting punishment of all. She'd spent her whole life running from responsibility, from commitment, from anything that required real effort or sacrifice. Now she'd be running forever, always looking over her shoulder, never able to build anything lasting because it might all disappear when her past caught up with her. Marcus got 8 years in federal prison. Eleanor got 5. Both sentences were longer than their lawyers had hoped for, but the judges weren't feeling particularly merciful toward people who'd stolen from the elderly and vulnerable. The day Marcus was sentenced, he turned to look at me one last time before they led him away in handcuffs. I met his eyes and nodded slightly, not forgiveness, just acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that this was how the story had to end. As for me? Well, I did call David back. I went back to corporate investigation, but this time on my own terms. I specialized in cases involving fraud against vulnerable populations, elderly scams, charity embezzlement, medical fraud. Turns out, my experience with grief counseling made me uniquely qualified to understand both the perpetrators and the victims. I was good at it. Better than I'd ever been before. Maybe heartbreak had sharpened my instincts, or maybe losing everything I thought I wanted had clarified what I actually needed. Either way, I found a purpose that felt right for the first time in years. 6 months after the trials ended, I got a letter. Prison mail, Marcus's name in the return address corner. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. "Dear Sarah," it began in his familiar handwriting. "I know I have no right to write to you, and I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know that I understand now what I lost when I lost you. I know I can never make up for what I did, but I want you to know that I'm sorry. Not just for the crimes, but for the way I treated you. For making you feel like you weren't enough when the truth is, I was never worthy of you. I hope you can find happiness with someone who deserves you." I read it twice, then folded it carefully and put it in Mom's recipe box with her note about being proud of my strength. Not because I forgave him, but because it felt like the final piece of the puzzle. The last acknowledgement that this chapter of my life was truly over. A year later, I ran into Linda, my friend from grief counseling who worked at Marcus's old company, at the grocery store. She hugged me tightly, the kind of hug that says everything without words. "How are you holding up?" she asked, studying my face with concern. "I'm good," I said, and realized I meant it. "Really good. I heard you went back to investigation work. That must be satisfying after everything that happened." "It is. I'm helping people who've been taken advantage of, making sure the bad guys face consequences. It feels like the right thing to be doing." She nodded, understanding in her eyes. "Marcus always said you were the smartest person he knew. He just wasn't smart enough to appreciate it." We talked for a few more minutes about mundane things, her kids, my work, the weather. Normal conversation between two women who'd survived their own kinds of loss and found ways to keep going. As I drove home, I thought about how different my life looked now compared to a year ago. The apartment was smaller than the house Marcus and I had shared, but it felt more like home than anywhere I'd lived in years. My work was challenging but meaningful. My relationships were fewer but more genuine. I'd lost a husband, a sister, and a mother-in-law, but I gained something more valuable, myself. That evening, I sat down with a cup of tea in Mom's recipe box, planning to try making her famous chocolate chip cookies. I'd never been much of a baker, But I had time now to learn new things, to rediscover parts of myself that had gotten lost in the shuffle of being someone's wife. As I measured flour and sugar, I thought about the conversation I'd had with Marcus and Eleanor on my doorstep all those months ago. They'd called me a monster for exposing their crimes, for refusing to protect them from the consequences of their choices. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was something monstrous about the calm precision with which I dismantled their lives. Maybe a truly good person would have found a way to forgive them, to help them find redemption instead of ensuring their destruction. But I tried being the good person for 8 years. I tried being understanding and supportive and endlessly forgiving. I tried making myself smaller to accommodate their selfishness, their cruelty, their complete disregard for my feelings. And where had it gotten me? Standing at my mother's grave while my husband told me to stop embarrassing him. Sitting at my kitchen table while he served me divorce papers and his mother nodded approvingly. No, I thought as I slid the cookies into the oven. I wasn't a monster. I was just a woman who'd finally learned that sometimes the most radical act of self-love is refusing to be anyone's victim. The cookies came out perfect, golden brown and smelling exactly like Mom's kitchen used to smell on Sunday afternoons. I ate 3 of them while they were still warm, savoring the sweetness and the memory of better times. Outside my window, the sun was setting over the city, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was beautiful in a way that made me grateful to be alive, to be free, to be exactly where I was in this moment. I thought about calling someone to share the cookies with, maybe Linda, maybe David from work, maybe one of the other women from my grief counseling group who'd become real friends in the months since everything fell apart. But for now, I was content to sit alone in my quiet apartment, surrounded by the smell of fresh cookies and the satisfaction of a life rebuilt on my own terms. I'd learned that solitude wasn't the same as loneliness, that being alone with yourself was only frightening if you didn't like who you'd become. I liked who I'd become just fine. The woman who'd stood crying at her mother's funeral while her husband humiliated her was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, less trusting but more authentic. Someone who understood that love without respect was worthless, that loyalty without reciprocity was a fool's game. Someone who would never again make herself small to accommodate other people's cruelty. The phone rang, probably another case, another person who'd been cheated or betrayed and needed someone to help them find justice. I'd answer it in the morning. Tonight was for cookies and quiet reflection and the deep satisfaction of knowing that sometimes, just sometimes, the bad guys really do get what they deserve. And sometimes, if you're very patient and very careful and very, very good at what you do, you get to be the one who makes sure they do.
Story 4.
At Christmas dinner, my brother loudly tapped his glass and announced, "Some people just take and never give back to this family," while everyone nodded and looked directly at me. When my mother added, "It's hurtful when certain people only show up for holidays but never help with bills," I just smiled calmly and said, "You're absolutely right. That's why I'm canceling the $5,000 monthly car payments and $8,500 mortgage I've been making for all of you." My brother choked on his cola so hard it came out his nose. And then, "Look, I need to tell you something that happened last Christmas, because honestly, I'm still processing it, and my therapist says talking about it helps. Plus, you're going to think I'm either completely savage or completely justified, maybe both." At Christmas dinner, my brother loudly tapped his glass and announced, "Some people just take and never give back to this family," while everyone nodded and looked directly at me. When my mother added, "It's hurtful when certain people only show up for holidays but never help with bills," I just smiled calmly and said, "You're absolutely right. That's why I'm canceling the $5,000 monthly car payments and $8,500 mortgage I've been making for all of you." My brother choked on his cola so hard it came out his nose. And then, well, that's when things got really interesting. But let me back up, because you need the full picture to understand why what happened next felt so deliciously perfect. 3 years ago, when I got my promotion to senior data analyst at a tech firm downtown, my family suddenly became very interested in my success. Not proud interested, more like sharks smelling blood interested. My mother called crying about how the mortgage was crushing her, how she might lose the house Dad left us. My brother Marcus needed a car for his business ventures, which, spoiler alert, was mostly selling protein supplements on Instagram. I was 28, single, living in a cramped studio apartment, eating ramen 3 nights a week so I could send them money. Because that's what good daughters do, right? Take care of family. Sacrifice for the greater good. Be the responsible one while everyone else gets to chase their dreams. The thing is, I actually believed I was helping. I thought temporary meant temporary. I thought grateful meant grateful. I was adorably naive. The car payment started as just until Marcus gets on his feet. The mortgage help was just until Mom finds work. 18 months later, Marcus had posted Instagram stories from Cabo twice, and Mom had redecorated the living room with a sectional that cost more than my rent. But every family gathering, I was the problem child. The one who never called enough. The one who was too busy for family. The one who showed up empty-handed to birthdays because I was literally keeping their lights on. Marcus would make these little comments, "Must be nice having all that tech money and no responsibilities." Mom would sigh dramatically, "I just wish Sarah would visit more. Money isn't everything." I started keeping receipts. Not actual receipts, though I had those too, but mental notes of every slight, every eye roll, every time they made me feel guilty for existing while simultaneously bleeding me dry. By December, I was done. Not angry done, strategically done. There's a difference. Christmas Eve at Mom's house felt like walking into a trap I'd helped design. The dining room looked straight out of a magazine: new china, fresh flowers, candles that probably cost more than my grocery budget. All funded by yours truly, though nobody mentioned that part. Marcus was wearing a designer watch I didn't recognize. His girlfriend Jessica, who'd never liked me, probably because I had the audacity to question why Marcus needed a BMW for business meetings at the gym, kept making comments about how some people just don't understand family loyalty. Aunt Linda was there with her husband Bob, both nodding along like background singers in a very depressing musical. My cousin Derek, who'd never worked a day in his life but somehow always had opinions about my career choices. I sat there picking at Mom's famous green bean casserole, which was actually just Green Giant with almonds, but we all pretended it was gourmet, listening to them discuss vacation plans and restaurant recommendations like I wasn't sitting right there subsidizing their lifestyle. The conversation had that familiar rhythm, everyone talking around me, not to me. Including me just enough to be polite, excluding me just enough to make a point. Marcus was telling some story about his latest client meeting when he stopped mid-sentence and grabbed his fork, tapping it against his wine glass with the authority of someone making a very important announcement. "You know what?" he said, and I could feel the room's energy shift. "I think we should talk about something that's been bothering me." "Oh, here we go. Some people just take and never give back to this family," he continued, looking directly at me with this expression of righteous disappointment that made my skin crawl. Everyone nodded. Actually nodded. Like this was a rehearsed moment they'd all been waiting for. Mom jumped in with perfect timing. "It's hurtful when certain people only show up for holidays but never help with bills." The silence stretched like taffy. They were all looking at me, waiting for what, exactly? An apology? A promise to do better? Tears? Instead, I felt this weird calm settle over me. Like when you're standing on the edge of a high dive and suddenly realize you're not scared anymore, you're excited. I smiled. Not a fake smile or a nervous smile, but the kind of smile you get when everything suddenly makes perfect sense. "You're absolutely right," I said, setting down my fork with deliberate care. "That's why I'm canceling the $5,000 monthly car payments and $8,500 mortgage I've been making for all of you." Marcus choked on his cola so hard it came out his nose. Jessica made this little squeaking sound. Mom's face went through about 6 different colors, settling on a shade I'd never seen before. The silence that followed was beautiful. Pure, crystalline shock. "Sarah," Mom finally managed, her voice cracking slightly. "What are you talking about?" I pulled out my phone, because of course I'd come prepared. 3 years in data analytics teaches you to document everything. "Well, let's see," I said, scrolling through my banking app with a casual air of someone discussing the weather. "Marcus, your BMW lease is $847 a month, but I've been paying $1,200 because you wanted the premium package. Plus insurance at $340 monthly because apparently 3 speeding tickets makes you high risk." Who knew? Marcus had recovered from his cola incident but was now the color of overcooked lobster. "And Mom, the mortgage I've been helping with?" Turns out helping meant paying the entire thing, plus property taxes, plus that home equity loan you took out for the kitchen renovation that you somehow forgot to mention. I kept scrolling, my voice getting lighter with each revelation. "Oh, and there's the groceries I have delivered here weekly, the utility bills for this house, which, by the way, are astronomical because apparently no one believes in turning off lights, and Marcus, that gym membership at the fancy place downtown. The one you said was essential for networking? That's $200 a month of my networking, buddy. Bob was staring at his plate like it might offer him an escape route. Derek had his phone out, probably texting his girlfriend about the family drama unfolding in real time. So when you say I take and never give back, I continued, standing up slowly, I'm curious what exactly you think I've been taking. Because from where I sit, it looks like I've been the family ATM for 3 years, and my only crime was not being cheerful enough about it. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall, if dominoes could argue and hyperventilate. Mom started crying, not sad crying, but that angry, frustrated crying that happens when someone's been caught and they know it. Sarah, you don't understand. No, Mom, I understand perfectly, I interrupted. I understand that I've been working 60-hour weeks to pay for Marcus's lifestyle while he tells people I'm selfish. I understand that I've been living like a college student so you could have fresh flowers on this table while complaining that I don't call enough. Marcus finally found his voice, you're being dramatic. We never asked. You absolutely did ask, I said, and this is where I pulled out the nuclear option. My phone. Would you like me to read the texts? Because I screenshot everything after the first year, when I started realizing this wasn't actually temporary. I scrolled to my favorites folder, yes, I had a folder labeled Family Receipts, because I'm that petty, and started reading in a cheerful voice that probably made me sound slightly unhinged. From Marcus, November 15th, Hey sis, cash flow is tight this month, can you cover the car payment? I promise I'll pay you back after the new year. From Mom, same day, honey, the mortgage company is being so demanding about their monthly payment thing, could you help out? I looked up at their horrified faces. Oh, and my personal favorite, from Marcus last week, Sarah's so lucky she doesn't have real responsibilities like the rest of us. Jessica whispered something to Marcus that made him go even redder. Aunt Linda was trying to disappear into her chair. The tension in the room was so thick you could spread it on crackers. But I wasn't done. 3 years of resentment doesn't dissolve with one dramatic speech. Here's what's going to happen, I said, and I could hear my voice getting that edge it gets when I'm negotiating contracts at work. Tomorrow, I'm calling the bank and removing myself from all auto pays. I'm canceling the grocery deliveries, the utility auto pays, everything. You have until January 15th to figure out your own finances. Sarah, please, Mom started. And before anyone starts with the guilt about family and loyalty and how I'm abandoning everyone, I continued, let me remind you that 5 minutes ago, you were all happily throwing me under the bus for being a terrible person who takes advantage of this family's generosity. The irony was so thick it practically had its own gravitational pull. Marcus recovered first, because he always did. He had that quality that probably served him well in his Instagram supplement business, the ability to pivot from being completely wrong to being aggressively self-righteous without missing a beat. This is exactly what I'm talking about, he said, standing up and pointing at me like I was a hostile witness. You're making this about money when it's about showing up, being present, caring about your family. I actually laughed out loud. Not a polite chuckle, a full, delighted laugh that made everyone jump slightly. Marcus, in the past 3 months, how many times have you called me when you didn't need money? The question hung in the air like smoke. This isn't about, he stammered. 0, I answered for him. The answer is 0. Same question for you, Silence. So when you say I don't show up, what you really mean is I don't show up with my checkbook and a smile. When you say I don't care about family, you mean I don't care enough to quietly bankrupt myself for your comfort. Jessica made the mistake of jumping in. Well, maybe if you weren't so focused on money all the time. I turned to her with what I hoped was my most pleasant expression. Jessica, right? We've met maybe 4 times in 2 years. You've never asked me about my job, my life, my interests, anything that wasn't related to what I could do for Marcus. So I'm genuinely curious why you think you have standing to comment on my character. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. It was like watching a fish try to argue. But since you brought it up, I continued, let's talk about money. Marcus, how much do you think I make? I don't know, like, a lot? Take a guess. Actual number. He looked uncomfortable, which was fair, because he'd never actually asked. None of them had. I was just the golden goose who laid golden eggs on demand. Like, 100,000? 67,000, I said. Before taxes. After taxes, student loans, health insurance, and my own living expenses, I was spending about 40% of my take-home income keeping all of you afloat. The math hit them like a slap. I could see Mom doing calculations in her head, probably for the first time since this whole arrangement started. I've been eating rice and beans for dinner half the week so Marcus could have his BMW and you could have your fresh flowers, I said quietly. And you want to lecture me about caring? What followed was a masterclass in family manipulation tactics, like watching a really depressing improv show where everyone kept trying different approaches to see what would stick. First came the classic but we're family approach from Aunt Linda, who apparently decided this was her moment to contribute. Sarah, honey, family helps family. That's just how it works. You're right, Linda, I agreed. Family does help family. When's the last time any of you helped me? Crickets. When I had the flu last year and couldn't get groceries, who brought me soup? When my car broke down and I needed a ride to work for a week, who offered? When I was stressed about the promotion and needed someone to talk to, who called to check in? More crickets. So many crickets it was practically a nature documentary. Then came the emotional manipulation phase. Mom started telling the story about how hard things had been since Dad died, how she was just trying to keep the family together, how the house was the only thing left of him. It was a good story. It might have worked 3 years ago. But I'd heard variations of it every time I hesitated about a payment, and frankly, I was immune now. Mom, I said gently, Dad died 4 years ago. You've been managing fine on your pension and Social Security. The mortgage was almost paid off when you took out the home equity loan for renovations you didn't need. The kitchen was falling apart. The kitchen was fine. You wanted granite countertops and a wine fridge. Which, again, I paid for. Marcus tried a different approach. Look, maybe we got a little comfortable with the arrangement, but that doesn't mean you have to just cut everyone off. We can work something out. What kind of something? Like a payment plan? Or maybe just help with emergencies? I stared at him. Marcus, your BMW lease isn't an emergency. Your gym membership isn't an emergency. Mom's decorative throw pillows aren't an emergency. But the house, Mom can downsize. There are beautiful condos in her price range. Or she can get a roommate. Or she can get a part-time job like most people her age who need extra income. The suggestion that Mom might have to work or change her lifestyle was apparently equivalent to suggesting she sell organs on the black market, based on the horrified reactions around the table. Things might have continued in this circular pattern of guilt, denial, and counterarguments, but Derek, sweet, clueless Derek, chose that moment to say the thing that turned my strategic calm into something sharper. I mean, Sarah, you don't have kids or anything. It's not like you have real expenses. The room went dead quiet. Even Marcus looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. I turned to Derek with a kind of smile that probably would have sent smarter people running for the exits. You're right, Derek. I don't have kids. Do you know why? He shook his head, suddenly looking like he regretted speaking. Because I can't afford them. Because I've been so busy supporting everyone else's choices that I haven't been able to save enough to start my own family. Because every time I think about dating seriously, I remember that I'm financially responsible for 6 adults, and it doesn't seem fair to drag someone into this mess. My voice was getting quieter, which somehow made it worse. I'm 31 years old. I wanted kids by now. I wanted a real apartment, maybe even a house of my own. I wanted to travel, take vacations, have hobbies that cost more than $20. But instead, I've been working myself into exhaustion so Marcus can pretend he's an entrepreneur and Mom can pretend she's still married to a man who could afford her lifestyle. The silence stretched until it felt like a physical presence in the room. So thank you, Derek, for reminding me that my sacrifice doesn't count because I didn't make the same life choices you did. Derek looked like he wanted to apologize, but I wasn't finished. You know what the really funny part is? All of you act like I'm the selfish one, but not one of you has ever asked me what I want. Not one of you has ever asked if I'm happy, if I need help, if I have dreams beyond being your personal bank. I picked up my purse and stood up. Well, now you know. What I want is my life back. Walking out of that house felt like emerging from underwater. The cold December air hit my face, and I realized I was shaking, not from the cold, but from adrenaline and something that felt suspiciously like freedom. My phone started buzzing before I even reached my car. Text after text, call after call. I turned it off and drove home in blessed silence. The next morning, I kept my promise. I called the bank and canceled all the auto pays. I canceled the grocery deliveries. I even called Marcus's insurance company and removed my card from his policy. Then I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went shopping for myself. Nothing crazy, just groceries that weren't rice and beans, a nice bottle of wine, and a subscription to a streaming service I'd been wanting to try. The phone calls and texts continued for weeks. The progression was predictable: anger, bargaining, guilt, more anger, then finally, silence. Marcus's BMW got repossessed on New Year's Day. Mom listed the house in February. Jessica broke up with Marcus sometime around Valentine's Day, which probably had nothing to do with his sudden lack of luxury vehicle, but the timing was interesting. It's been almost a year now, and I'd love to tell you there was some beautiful reconciliation where everyone realized their mistakes and we're all one big happy family again. That didn't happen. What did happen was smaller, but maybe more important. I started therapy. I bought a real couch, not from a thrift store, not from Facebook Marketplace, but an actual new couch that I picked out because I liked it. I took a vacation to Costa Rica. I went on dates without calculating whether I could afford to split a decent dinner check. I also started saying no to things. Not just family things, work things, social things, volunteer obligations that I'd accepted out of guilt. It was like learning a new language, and I was surprisingly fluent once I got started. Mom calls occasionally now. Not for money, she knows better, but actual calls where she asks about my life. They're awkward and stilted, like we're strangers trying to remember how to be related, but there's something. Marcus and I don't talk. I heard through Aunt Linda that he moved back in with Mom before she sold the house, and they're both living in a duplex now. He got a job at a marketing firm, a real job with a salary and everything. Apparently, financial necessity is an excellent motivator. The family WhatsApp group that I was never included in despite being the primary financial contributor has apparently disbanded. Aunt Linda says everyone's processing what happened and reassessing relationships. Which is a very polite way of saying they realize they actually have to pay for their own stuff now and aren't sure how to interact with me without a financial transaction involved. Here's the thing I didn't expect: I thought I'd feel guilty. I thought I'd lie awake at night wondering if I'd been too harsh, if I should have handled it differently, if I was a terrible person for cutting off my family. Instead, I felt lighter. Like I'd been carrying around a backpack full of rocks for 3 years and someone had finally told me I was allowed to set it down. Don't get me wrong, it hurt. It still hurts. There's something deeply sad about realizing that your family's love was apparently conditional on your bank account. There's something even sadder about realizing they probably didn't even see it that way. They just genuinely believed that being the successful one meant being the family ATM. But the alternative was continuing to enable a dynamic that was slowly killing my spirit and my future. The alternative was being 35, 40, 50 years old, still eating ramen so Marcus could drive luxury cars and Mom could keep up appearances. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just talked to them earlier, set boundaries gradually instead of detonating the whole arrangement on Christmas Eve. But honestly, I tried that. For months, I'd made little comments about needing to cut back, about wanting to save money, how tight things were getting. They nodded and agreed and then asked for help with unexpected expenses the next week. They didn't hear me until I stopped talking and started taking action. What I didn't anticipate was how the rest of my life would change once I wasn't hemorrhaging money every month. First, there were the obvious things: better food, a savings account that actually accumulated money, the ability to go out with friends without calculating exactly how much I could spend. But then there were the subtle changes that caught me off guard. I started sleeping better. I stopped getting that spike of anxiety every time my phone buzzed, wondering if it was another emergency that required my immediate financial attention. I joined a hiking club. I took up pottery. I started dating a guy from work, nothing serious yet, but the point is I felt free to explore the possibility without the weight of supporting 6 other people hanging over every conversation about the future. Most surprisingly, I started being honest in other areas of my life. It's like learning to say no to my family taught me I was allowed to have opinions and boundaries everywhere else too. When my boss tried to pile extra projects on me without additional compensation, I said no. When friends expected me to always be the one planning and paying for group activities, I stopped volunteering. When my landlord tried to raise my rent above market rates, I negotiated instead of just accepting it. It was like I'd been living my whole life as a supporting character in everyone else's story, and I suddenly remembered I was allowed to be the protagonist of my own. About 6 months after Christmas, Marcus showed up at my apartment. Not angry Marcus or desperate Marcus, but a version I hadn't seen since we were kids, tired, honest Marcus who looked like he'd been thinking about things for a long time. "Can we talk?" he asked, standing in my doorway holding 2 cups of coffee from the place down the street that we used to go to when we were teenagers. I let him in, mostly because I was curious about what this version of my brother had to say. "I've been going to therapy," he said without preamble. "Mom's idea, actually. She said if we want any chance of fixing this, we need to understand what went wrong." I sat down across from him, coffee warming my hands, and waited. "I didn't realize," he said quietly. "About the money, I mean. I knew you were helping out, but I didn't know it was. I didn't know you were paying for everything." "I told you. Multiple times." "No, you mentioned amounts, but I didn't. I didn't add it up. I didn't think about what it meant for you." He looked genuinely ashamed. "I was so caught up in my own stuff that I didn't see what we were doing to you." It wasn't the full apology I might have wanted, but it was honest, which was more than I'd expected. "Marcus," I said carefully, "it wasn't just the money. It was the way you made me feel guilty for not doing more. It was the way none of you seemed to see me as a person with my own needs and wants." He nodded. "I know. That's what the therapist said. She said we were treating you like a resource instead of a person." We talked for 2 hours. Not about money or logistics, but about how things had gotten so twisted, about the assumptions we'd all made, about the resentment that had built up on both sides. It wasn't a magical reconciliation. We're still working on rebuilding our relationship, and it's awkward and complicated, and sometimes one of us says the wrong thing and we have to start over. But it's something. It's honest, which is more than we had before. I wish I could tell you this story has a neat ending where everyone learned their lesson and we're all closer than ever. Real life is messier than that. Mom and I have dinner once a month now. She's working part-time at a bookstore and seems happier than she was when I was subsidizing her lifestyle. She's made friends with her coworkers and joined a book club. Turns out having actual responsibilities and a smaller budget forced her to build a real life instead of just maintaining the appearance of her old one. Marcus got promoted at his job and is paying his own bills for the first time in his adult life. He's dating someone new, a teacher who doesn't seem impressed by expensive cars or designer watches, which is probably good for him. We're not back to family dinners and group texts, but we're not in complete silence either. It's like we're all learning how to be related to each other as adults instead of falling back on the patterns we established when we were kids. The rest of the family has mostly settled into polite distance. Aunt Linda sends birthday cards. Derek occasionally likes my Instagram posts. Everyone's very careful not to mention money or ask for favors, which is probably for the best. But let me tell you about the part I haven't mentioned yet, the detective work that happened in the months after Christmas. Because once I stopped being their financial safety net, some interesting truths started surfacing. Remember how Mom always talked about how tight money was, how she was barely scraping by? Well, funny thing about financial desperation, it usually doesn't come with a subscription to premium cable, monthly wine club deliveries, and a house cleaner twice a week. I started doing what I do best, analyzing data. Not because I was trying to catch them in lies, but because I genuinely wanted to understand how I'd been so blind to what was actually happening. It started innocently enough. I was helping Mom set up online banking so she could manage her bills independently. See how helpful I am? And I couldn't help but notice some patterns in her transaction history. $200 at the casino every Tuesday. $150 weekly at the nail salon. A standing monthly payment to something called Luxury Living Home Services that turned out to be a meal delivery service for gourmet dinners. I'm not judging anyone for having hobbies or treating themselves. But when you're crying to your daughter about potentially losing the house while spending $800 a month on casino visits and prepared meals, well, that changes the narrative a bit. Then there was Marcus's situation. His business venture that never seemed to turn a profit but somehow required constant investment in networking opportunities and professional development. After his BMW got repossessed, I heard through Aunt Linda that he was devastated not because he couldn't get to work, he could have bought a reliable used car for what I was paying monthly on that lease, but because image is everything in sales. Sales. Not supplement entrepreneurship. He'd apparently been working part-time in car sales for 8 months while I was funding his BMW and telling people he was building his own business empire. The pieces started falling into place like dominoes in reverse. All those emergency expenses that popped up right when I'd mentioned maybe cutting back on support. Mom's mysterious doctor appointments that required expensive copays, which turned out to be cosmetic procedures, not medical necessities. Marcus's business meetings that happened to coincide with expensive restaurants and weekend trips. I wasn't supporting a struggling family. I was subsidizing a lifestyle that they felt entitled to but couldn't actually afford. This next part is going to sound like I'm making it up, but I swear on everything I hold dear that this is exactly what happened. I was helping Mom pack up Dad's office, a task we'd all been avoiding for 4 years, when I found his old file cabinet. Mom had asked me to just throw everything away, but something made me look through the papers first. Most of it was exactly what you'd expect: old tax returns, insurance policies, warranty information for appliances we'd long since replaced. But at the very back, in a folder labeled Financial Planning, I found something that made my blood run cold. Life insurance policies. Plural. With a combined payout of $750,000. I sat on the floor of that dusty office, holding papers that proved my mother had received $750,000 when Dad died, and tried to understand how we'd gotten to a place where she was crying to me about mortgage payments. The mortgage that, according to these same papers, should have been completely paid off with the first insurance policy alone. I called the insurance companies. I know I probably shouldn't have, but I needed to understand what had happened to that money. Both policies had been paid out in full within 6 months of Dad's death. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I asked Mom directly. "Oh honey," she said, with that tone people use when they're about to tell you something they think will upset you. "I didn't want to burden you kids with the details, but there were so many expenses after your father died. The funeral, the medical bills, legal fees. It all adds up so quickly." I nodded sympathetically, doing mental math. Even the most expensive funeral in our town wouldn't cost more than $15,000. Dad's medical bills had been covered by insurance. Legal fees for probate on a straightforward estate might run $5,000. That left somewhere around $730,000 unaccounted for. "Mom," I said carefully, "what happened to the rest?" She got flustered, started talking about investments that hadn't worked out, about how complicated finances were, about how I wouldn't understand because I wasn't married and didn't know what it was like to lose a partner. "But I work in data analytics. I understand numbers, and these numbers weren't adding up." After some very uncomfortable conversations and a lot of digging, the truth came out in pieces. Mom had given Marcus $200,000 to invest in his business opportunities. She'd renovated the house, not just the kitchen, but a full remodel that cost $180,000. She'd bought a new car, taken a 3-month cruise to Europe, and yes, she'd been gambling regularly since Dad died. By the time I started helping with the mortgage 2 years later, she'd burned through most of the insurance money and taken out loans against the house to maintain her lifestyle. She hadn't been struggling financially because of Dad's death. She'd been struggling because she'd spent her windfall without thinking about the future, and when reality hit, it was easier to let her responsible daughter pick up the pieces than admit what had happened. Once the truth about Mom and Marcus came out, I started seeing the whole family dynamic differently. It was like getting glasses for the first time and realizing that what you thought was normal vision was actually everything being blurry. Aunt Linda, who'd been so quick to lecture me about family loyalty, had been getting loans from Mom for years, loans that were never repaid and never expected to be. The money Mom was giving Linda was money I was sending for mortgage payments. Derek, my cousin who'd made the comment about me not having real expenses, had been living in Mom's basement rent-free for 6 months while he figured out his next move. He was 28 years old and had never held a job for more than 3 months, but somehow I was the irresponsible one. Even Bob, Linda's husband, had gotten in on the action. Mom had co-signed a loan for his motorcycle, which meant when he defaulted, the payments had been coming out of the account I was depositing mortgage money into. I was basically funding a small commune of adults who decided that traditional concepts like earning your own money and paying your own bills were outdated notions that didn't apply to them. The most infuriating part wasn't even the money. It was the gaslighting. The way they'd made me feel selfish and ungrateful for not being more involved while I was literally paying for their entire lifestyle. The way they'd positioned themselves as the victims of my neglect while systematically taking advantage of my guilt and sense of responsibility. You know what's funny about finally standing up for yourself in one area of your life? It makes you notice all the other places where you've been getting walked over. About 3 months after Christmas, my boss called me into his office for what he described as a budget conversation. Basically, the company was looking to cut costs, and they decided that my department could handle the same workload with fewer people. Two of my co-workers were being let go, and their responsibilities would be temporarily redistributed among the remaining staff. Guess who was getting the biggest share of extra work? Old Sarah would have said, of course, whatever the company needs, and then spent the next 6 months working 70-hour weeks for the same pay while watching management pat themselves on the back for improving efficiency. New Sarah looked at my boss and said, "I'm happy to discuss taking on additional responsibilities, but we'll need to talk about compensation adjustment to reflect the increased workload." He looked genuinely shocked. Like I'd spoken to him in a foreign language. "Sarah, we're all tightening our belts here. This isn't really the time to be talking about raises." "Then this isn't really the time to be talking about me doing 3 people's jobs," I replied calmly. The conversation that followed was enlightening. It turned out that my department had been one of the most profitable in the company for 2 years running, but somehow there was never money in the budget for raises or bonuses. Meanwhile, upper management had been getting regular compensation increases. I'd been so busy being grateful for having a job and so focused on proving I was a team player that I hadn't noticed I was being taken advantage of there too. Long story short, I got a 15% raise and a promise that the temporary workload increase would be reevaluated in 6 months. If it wasn't sustainable with current staffing, they'd hire additional people instead of expecting miracles. I also started updating my resume. Remember how I mentioned I'd started dating someone from work? Well, that turned into its own little adventure in boundary setting. Jake seemed great at first. He was funny, smart, ambitious, all the things you want in a potential partner. We'd been dating for about 2 months when he started making comments about how comfortable my financial situation was. "It must be nice not having to worry about money," he'd say when I'd offer to split the check at dinner. "You're so lucky you can afford to live alone," he'd comment when he saw my apartment. At first, I thought he was just making conversation. But then he started making jokes about how I should pay for dates since I made more money than he did. When I mentioned I was looking at buying a house, he made a comment about how some people have all the luck. The old me would have internalized this, would have started questioning whether I was being selfish by not automatically picking up every check, whether I was being show-offy by mentioning my financial goals. The new me recognized the pattern immediately. "Jake," I said after he made another comment about my luck in being able to afford vacation time, "do you think my financial situation is the result of luck?" "Well, no, but some people just have it easier. I work 60 hours a week. I live in a studio apartment that's smaller than most people's living rooms. I buy generic groceries and haven't bought new clothes in 6 months. What exactly about my lifestyle seems easy to you?" He backpedaled, but the damage was done. I could see where this relationship was heading, toward another situation where someone expected me to fund their lifestyle while resenting me for having the means to do it. We broke up the following week. He called me materialistic and said I cared more about money than people, which was hilarious coming from someone who'd spent 2 months making comments about my financial situation. But here's the interesting part: instead of feeling rejected or like I'd failed at yet another relationship, I felt relieved. Like I'd dodged a bullet. I was finally learning to recognize the red flags early instead of ignoring them until I was drowning. By summer, I barely recognized my own life. Not just because of the obvious changes, the better apartment I'd moved into, the actual savings account, the ability to go out to dinner without calculating tips, but because I felt like a different person. I started saying what I actually thought instead of what I thought people wanted to hear. When friends made plans that were outside my budget or that I simply didn't want to do, I said no without elaborate explanations or apologies. When my coworker asked if I wanted to chip in for an expensive going-away gift for our boss, the same boss who'd tried to triple my workload without increasing my pay, I said, "No thanks, I'll get him something separately if I decide to." When the woman at the grocery store tried to guilt me into rounding up my purchase for charity, I politely declined instead of adding the extra dollar while internally cursing my inability to say no. These might sound like tiny things, but they added up to something huge, the feeling that my preferences and boundaries mattered. I also started doing things just because I wanted to. I took a weekend pottery class. I bought concert tickets to see a band I'd loved since college. I got a massage, not because I was stressed or sore, but because it sounded nice. The most surprising change was how other people started treating me. When you stop being a people pleaser, you discover that most people actually respect you more, not less. The friends who'd been used to me always accommodating their schedules started actually asking what worked for me. Coworkers stopped assuming I'd volunteer for every thankless task. It was like I'd been walking around with a sign that said feel free to take advantage of me and had finally taken it down. Last Christmas, exactly 1 year after the great family financial intervention, I did something unprecedented. I spent it alone. Not because I was lonely or bitter, but because I wanted to. I woke up without an alarm, made pancakes from scratch, and spent the morning reading a book I'd been meaning to get to for months. In the afternoon, I video called with a college friend who'd moved to Seattle. We talked for 2 hours about books and travel plans and her new job, and not once did the conversation turn to money or favors or obligations. Marcus texted me around dinner time, "Merry Christmas, sis. Hope you're doing well." It was simple, straightforward, and didn't ask for anything. I texted back, "Merry Christmas to you too. Hope the new job is going well." Mom called that evening. We talked for about 20 minutes, actually talked, about her book club and my pottery class and whether I thought she should get a cat. It was the most normal conversation we'd had since I was a teenager. "I miss you," she said before we hung up. "I miss you too," I replied, and I meant it. I missed the version of our relationship that could have existed if money had never become the central theme. "Maybe we could have lunch next week?" she asked. I'd like that. And I did like it. Not because I felt obligated or guilty, but because I genuinely wanted to spend time with my mother when there was no financial agenda attached. It's been 18 months now since Christmas dinner 2023, and I'm still learning how to live without the weight of everyone else's financial problems on my shoulders. I bought that house, a small craftsman with good bones and a garden that's currently more weeds than flowers, but it's mine. When I signed the papers, the only person I needed to consider was myself. I'm dating again, but differently this time. I'm upfront about my boundaries and expectations, and I don't apologize for having standards. It's amazing how much easier dating becomes when you're not desperately trying to prove you're worthy of love by being endlessly accommodating. Marcus and I have dinner once a month now. He pays his own check, and we talk about normal sibling things, his job, my garden, whether we think Mom's new book club boyfriend is good enough for her. It's not the relationship we had when we were kids, but it's honest, which is better. Mom is thriving in ways that surprise me. Without the financial safety net I provided, she's had to rebuild her social life and find purpose beyond maintaining appearances. She volunteers at the library, has a circle of friends her own age, and seems genuinely happier than she was when I was subsidizing her lifestyle. The rest of the family has mostly drifted back to their own lives. Derek moved out of Mom's basement and got a job at a marketing firm. Aunt Linda and Bob are managing their own finances without crisis calls every few months. Everyone's learned to function without me as their emergency bank. Here's what nobody tells you about setting boundaries with family: it's not a one-time conversation. It's an ongoing process of deciding who you want to be and what kind of relationships you want to have. Some people will respect your boundaries and adjust their behavior accordingly. Others will test those boundaries repeatedly, hoping you'll eventually cave and go back to the old patterns. And some people will never forgive you for refusing to be who they needed you to be, even when that version of you was slowly destroying your own life. That's okay. It has to be okay, because the alternative is living your entire life as a supporting character in other people's stories. I'm 32 now, and for the first time since I was 22 and got my first real job, I'm living within my own story. It's messier than I expected, lonelier sometimes, but also fuller and more honest and completely mine. The freedom to choose your own relationships, your own financial priorities, your own definition of family responsibility, that's not selfish. That's survival. And sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling people to avoid the consequences of their choices, even when those people are family, even when it hurts, even when they'll never understand why you had to do it. Especially then. Last week, I got a text from an unknown number: "Hey, I heard about what you did with your family from a mutual friend. I'm going through something similar and could really use someone to talk to who's been there." I spent 2 hours on the phone with a stranger who was funding her brother's lifestyle while he criticized her for not being supportive enough. I told her what I wish someone had told me 3 years ago: that you can love people without financially supporting them, that boundaries aren't punishment, and that choosing your own life doesn't make you a bad person. Maybe that's the real ending to this story, not just learning to save myself, but being able to help other people realize they're drowning too. The Christmas dinner intervention was just the beginning. Everything that came after, the messy process of rebuilding relationships on honest ground, learning to recognize my own worth, discovering what I actually wanted when I wasn't constantly managing everyone else's crises, that's the real story. And honestly, it's a much better story than the one where I stayed quiet, kept paying everyone's bills, and slowly disappeared into resentment and exhaustion. Sometimes you have to be the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. And sometimes, that's the only choice that makes sense.